Welcome back, everybody, and we're starting the afternoon with Threepwood, and we have Mr. Anderson. So over to you.
Sorry, it's Mr.
Oh, sorry.
Justin Crane.
Yes, sorry.
Yep. So good afternoon, and nice to see you again. My name is Justin Crane, and I'm here representing the Threepwood Farm Residents Association and Threepwood Custodians Limited, which are the 50 properties and the 150 hectare farm that neighbour the Ladies Mile development to the east and northeast towards Lake Hayes and up on Slope Hill. I am joined by John Newson, who's been the farm advisor for us for over 15 years, and will shortly be joined, hopefully, by Karen Ramsey, who's been the manager of Threepwood since its inception 20 years ago. We appreciate the time that has been granted us here today, as well as the time you spent on site last week. We have submitted some additional photos of the key sites yesterday to aid discussions today. Whilst Threepwood opposed the variation in its current form, we recognise the need for additional housing and amenities to be located in the master plan area and remain open to any discussions with the QLDC to achieve a workable solution for wastewater, stormwater management, as well as an active travel link. However, Threepwood is of the view that a significant amount of the burden of the Ladies Mile development is being placed on the residents of Threepwood with no resulting benefit. Furthermore, we are of the view that a significant amount of the burden of the Ladies Mile development is being placed on the two natural amenities that underpin the feasibility of the development, and those are the outstanding natural feature of Slope Hill and Lake Hayes, with potentially vast negative impacts on both of them. Addressing these views in turn, the burden that the QLDC and its advisors are proposing that Threepwood undertake are as follows. We are to give up one of the farm's few flat and productive paddocks to house the pump station that will service the majority of the master plan area. So instead of seeing stocks and crops as we drive in and out of our front entrance, we get to see a pump station. Not only are we being asked to have 10,000 neighbours on our boundary, we're effectively being asked to process their waste on our land as well. Obviously, this pump station could be located anywhere in the hundreds of acres of land that is being developed. But the Three Waters Infrastructure Report has recommended Threepwood's front entrance because that is where gravity wants to take water. More on this when we talk about stormwater. And then there's the need to provide access to Lake Hayes for our 10,000 neighbours via active travel links. There is a proposed active travel link that runs parallel to State Highway 6 from the master area plan to Lake Hayes, which requires an amenity access of between 10 to 20 metres. There is currently 3 metres between Threepwood's paddock fence to the State Highway. You can see the photos that were provided yesterday. On the other side of the Threepwood front entrance, there is more room, as Threepwood has already provided an easement from a 10-vehicle car park on our land to access Lake Hayes. So say 40 people, not 10,000 people. But despite the farm losing productive paddock in order to accommodate an active travel link, it is absolutely the logical place to have an active travel link, not only for the master plan area, but also the Lake Hayes estate and Shotover country, assuming we can connect them safely across the state highway. Where it is not logical, although legal, to have an active travel link is beneath the farm's stormwater and arrow irrigation catchment pond, through another one of the farm's few flat and productive paddocks, and past the farm's work sheds, thereby cutting off the farm buildings and heavy equipment from the majority of the farm, which is up on Slope Hill. As outlined in our farm advisor's report, this farm is uneconomic and barely viable as it is. If you include the additional complications of having 10,000 people and say 2,500 dogs walking through the farm, and the burden this adds to health and safety, for example, tractors and other heavy farm equipment crossing the active travel link throughout the day to get to the slope hill, including during low light environments at dawn and dusk, or rabbit control via shooting and poisoning programs close to the active travel link, plus the burden this adds to stock management with roaming dogs and people during lambing season. It is a recipe for disaster, and no wonder that the current farmer has asked to terminate his lease early. And it's at this point where the burden of this development starts to fall heavily on the two natural amenities that underpin the feasibility of the development, and the outstanding natural feature of Slope Hill and Lake Hayes, again, with potentially vast negative impacts on both of them. Actively farming Threepwood Farm is the only way to maintain Slope Hill as an outstanding natural feature. If Slope Hill is not farmed, it will quickly be overrun by gorse and rabbits and will no longer be an outstanding natural feature. Threepwood does not make money farming Threepwood. The farm lease is about $18,000 a year, if we can find a farmer that is willing to take it on, particularly with the uncertainty that the development next door is causing. Rabbit control alone is $30,000 a year. So we're already in the red just on those two accounts. We farm Threepwood because it's been farmed since the 1860s, and it is an integral part of the heritage of this area. We farm Threepwood because we see ourselves as the custodians of the outstanding natural feature that is Slope Hill. The proposed active travel link through the farm puts both the farm and, by default, the outstanding natural feature of Slope Hill at risk. The outstanding natural feature that is the only key natural mitigant to being able to put 2,400 residents in a rural area. Now, the second natural amenity that is being asked to take a significant burden for the development of the master plan area is Lake Hayes. The council's experts have concluded that gravity is wanting to take water to Lake Hayes. The council's experts have also conceded that in a 1-in-100-year event, stormwater and all the silt that it will bring with it will drain into Lake Hayes. That 1-in-100-year event has happened 3 times in my 10-year involvement with Threepwood. And that was with acres of paddock along the Ladies' Mile to help slow and store the water and silt that it carries. When those paddocks are developed into buildings and roads, that water will travel faster than it has before, picking up more silt and rubbish than it has before. And once it has flooded the front entrance of Threepwood, it will escape down the state highway into Lake Hayes, causing unquantifiable amounts of environmental damage to what is a lake that is already trying to recover. There's also been little consideration of the body of water, the Arrow irrigation race, that runs above part of the master plan area, and the potential additional volumes of water that could add to stormwater should it fail or just pump too much water for the stormwater catchment pond to cope with. I won't go further on this point, as there are smarter people speaking after me in regards to the potential impact of Lake Hayes of this planned development, if not thought through and executed properly. Nor will I talk about the burden the additional traffic congestion will have on the residents of Threepwood, as I'm sure that has been well covered by others. Except that whilst it might be okay to sit in traffic for 20 to 30 minutes a day if you live in a city like Auckland, when there are 1.7 million people, there are only 30,000 of us that live in this semi-rural area on a permanent basis. So to conclude, whilst Threepwood recognise the need for additional housing and amenities in this area, and may be willing to help where we can, for example, establishing the active travel link that runs beside the state highway across our land, we are strongly opposed to a pump station on our land at our front entrance. And we strongly implore you to consider the potential impact of any active travel link running through the farm. Not only the negative impact it would have on this historic farm, and by default, the negative impact it would have on the maintenance of Slope Hill as an outstanding natural feature. Finally, we are of the strong opinion that too much of the burden of the Ladies Mile development is being placed on Threepwood, the outstanding natural feature of Slope Hill and Lake Hayes. Thank you. Any questions? I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crane. I'll just check if there are any questions. Judith?
No, I think I'm all right. I think you've been very clear. Thank you.
Huani?
No, and thanks. It's been very useful, both being on site and hearing your presentation to us today. Thanks.
Can I just clarify, you made a point about stormwater and State Highway 6.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the, dare I say, what is the management of stormwater as State Highway 6 drops down and around the lake at that point? Are there pipes or is it just overland flow, something that we didn't see when we were out on site?
Well, the gentleman that's speaking after me will be able to speak to that in more detail, but currently there is no management per se of stormwater coming off the Ladies Mile area, but it will track down State Highway 6 on the road, and then that will naturally go into Lake Hayes as opposed to the Lake Hayes outlet, which is on the other side of the road.
Okay, thank you.
Ian?
No, thank you.
Thank
Just
you.
Just a couple of questions from me, Mr. Crane. Again, at the site visit, when the entryway you discussed mentioned from the submission, the photos of the flooding. I was just wondering, there's some photos of flooding in your submission, and when they were and what type of weather event, if you know?
I think the dates are in there. So those were two years ago, 2 to 3 years ago. And generally, what will happen is it would have had a significant amount of rain over a period of time. And so the ground will be saturated, and therefore there's no ability for the ground to take any more water. And it also then might get quite cold, and then the grounds become frosted, so effectively a little bit like hardscape. And then we have a big weather event, and the water will then just race over those paddocks. But again, it's not that relevant anymore because those paddocks would be hardscaped anyway when developed. So that water is just going to want to track across there as if it were frozen ground. So you go from a state where we have all the conditions setting up for that event to happen to once it's developed and that those conditions are there permanently then. So water will travel across that much faster.
Thank you. And we've got Mr. Newson here to speak to us. I think my next questions might be for him. So, Mr. Newson. And we've read your letter, Mr. Newson, so there's no need to reread that, but just any particular highlights or summary of what you've said to draw our minds and our attention to, please.
Yes, I think it's important to note the scale of this farm. It's a very small scale, and the management is obliged to keep it in ship-shape condition for the benefit of the residents who own the land. But it's just hard for me to imagine the farm being split in two by this access for potentially the all these walkers and dog owners and what have you. It's so hard for me to imagine, there's going to be more houses than already exists in Arrowtown, with the residents plus those on the other side of the road using the access tracks. So it's just hard for me to imagine the impact it'll have on the management of the farm.
And is there anything else specifically? I mean, your focus is on that, but you also talk about the farm operations, etc., which we've read. But is there anything else you'd like to add to that, or we can go to questions?
I sort of understood that there's been no negotiation or discussion relating to fencing of the access track, and I just presumed if we wanted to keep the dogs away from upsetting the stock, particularly in the lambing period, that it would be double fenced. But to have a quality that stops big dogs leaping over the top or small dogs wriggling through the netting mesh, it's would have to be fairly substantial structure.
And Mr. Brown has responded to some of the things in his evidence. Have you seen that and looked at that?
Yeah, I actually had a look up the design for the cattle stops he was proposing, and they're not very wide and they're pretty light, and we'd expect 120 horsepower tractors, which will be about 50% wider than the cattle stops he was proposing, and they'd probably be up to 3.5 to 4 tonnes in weight. So I'm not sure if they would have a great application in this situation.
And just so I'm very clear about the crossing, and sorry panel, but before the rest of the panel ask questions, been obviously onto the land, etc., had a look round. There's the farm sheds, and I've just got Google to help me because I'm not local. There's the farm sheds there. The way I see it, and is it right that the access way then would link on, would it, to Marshall Ave?
Correct.
And that is part of the farm track as well, along Marshall Ave? Or would it be on the roadway type part within the sort of Threepwood area? I know it's on a road, so it's not.
So there's two key accesses to get up onto the farm, up on Slope Hill. Both of those would require going through the proposed active travel link. One would be effectively sort of where we drove through, sort of past that tennis court area, and then up there. The second one would be that track that you would have seen when we were at the entrance of Threepwood that goes up the side of the hill. So even currently we have tractors and the farm equipment travelling along Marshall Avenue to access that farm track that goes up the hill to get to the north side, northeast side of the farm. So there's two areas. It's I guess what I'm saying is that even if we can get the walkers and pets safely to Marshall Avenue is will still have heavy equipment. It still does have it daily running up and down it because that is the second access to up to the farm.
Thank you. That's helpful. It just helps me ground it. Well, I was looking at Google while you were talking and getting that clear in my head. Questions, Judith? You might have.
One thing I was interested in is obviously when we were on site, we came up the sort of McDowell Drive and we turned left and we went along the shelter belt to get to the sort of Slope Hill area and your flat paddock area, and the potential future active link goes across that paper road. How often do you bring your stock down from Slope Hill to those flat paddocks?
Well,
Vice versa?
there'll be stock on the flat paddocks as well as the hill. So it's a constant moving, trying to cope with the seasonal flow of dry matter or grass growth. There'll be frequent moving either way. You'll probably be cropping the heavy paddocks, and there's only about 20% of the stock on the south side of the road or where the buildings are, and 80% on the other side. But to put a specific number of movements will be very difficult because there'll be a mixed age flock of ewes, probably some replacement ewe hoggets, and some cattle would have to come down to be handled in the yards, which are also around the farm building area.
So I'm trying to get a sense of scale. So exact numbers aren't necessary. We're talking daily, weekly, monthly?
Oh, let's say weekly.
Weekly.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not, we're not bringing the stock down from the hill, to once or twice a year to tell them or shear them. It's just a constant ongoing rotation, because obviously the flat paddocks are significantly easier to irrigate and therefore grow.
Yeah, you have better
boomer.
grazing down there.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just basically go through those, they go back up, grass grows, and they come back down.
Yeah.
And that's just to the paddocks. Then obviously there may be a reason for them to go into the farm buildings as well for shearing and
Okay.
so on and so forth.
And you mentioned that you're sort of using Marshall Ave to access Slope Hill daily. Once
Yes.
again, just a sense of scale, is it sort of 3, 4, 5 times a day, or are we talking 10, 11?
Oh, it'd be
Times a day.
rather soon. So, I mean, in the winter, they'd be taking feed up there, potentially as well, onto the higher paddocks. So, so it'd be, multiple times a day. And then obviously with farmers being farmers, that's going to be early, in low light situations.
Yeah.
So it is, because it's the only way we can get up onto the farm.
Well, thank you for that. It gives me a good sense of scale
Yeah.
of the potential issue, which is what I was keen to understand. Thank you.
I have a stock management welfare, animal welfare question. And I'm no high country farmer, but I noticed that you've got windbreaks and those sort of things. Significant storm events coming through. Do you use the flats for the purpose of taking them off the hill, or do you hope that they're in the lee of the hill when the weather comes through? I'm just trying to understand, should you lose the flats, what impact that has on your stock management?
Well, really, if you lost the flats, the same situation would prevail, because the key is, and the flats contain the stock handling facilities. So if the flats weren't there, bearing in mind they'd only contribute to less than 20% of the total stock, the remaining stock would have to be available. The handling facilities would have to be available for their use.
But we also have the ability. So I think a classic example would be a cold snap in through lambing, which we could see coming potentially, a few days out. We then have the ability to bring the lambs down off the hill, down into the more sheltered flatter areas where there are the breaks to the southerly. But I wouldn't be describing us as a high country farm if only we were.
If it was well stocked up, which it must be for the lessee to have any chance at all of making any money, it would be difficult to shift newborn lambs around at all. So you'd take your chance with the weather. And in the tussock areas, they use shelter behind the tussocks, and they've got a covering of wool, and they'll be looking after their offspring.
No, that's all. Thanks very much.
Do you need to fertilise the farm at all?
Fertilise it? Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. To replace the nutrients removed, that's standard procedure.
And so what fertilisers are you using?
The minimum that's discussed is sulphurised superphosphate at low rates, probably 150 kilograms to the hectare. And there's a specific requirement that the hill faces that border Lake Hayes don't get fertilised, so it's to prevent any unnecessary runoff into the lake.
And how often would you be fertilising? How many times a year?
Oh, once,
Just
as a maintenance, annual maintenance.
Lovely, thank you.
No, I've got no additional questions, so thank you very much. Thank you for the time and clarity of the submission, and also for the extra material and photos presented too. That's very helpful, and for showing us around. That allowed us to understand the area and the issues much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, next we have the Friends of Lake Hayes.
Thank you.
And all over to you. We're all ready and ready to go. We've got the summary document that's been provided. So
Did you get one yesterday from my latest one?
date 13 December.
That's right, today, sorry.
Perfect. Yep, lovely.
Okay, thank you. So I'm Mike Hanf, currently the chair of Friends of Lake Hayes. I've lived in the district 25 years and lived in and around the lake for that period. The Friends of Lake Hayes oppose the proposed plan change unless we see some changes to the stormwater regime that's proposed. What I've done is I've given you that documentation in terms of what I was proposing to talk about, and I'd like to take that as read along with the other two documents. So you've now got 3 documents in terms of how this process works.
Thank you.
I'd like to put a bit of context around that, if that's today, just
Perfect.
background.
Just to make sure we're all on the same page with the documents, we've got the 13 December, we've got the statement of evidence dated 20 October.
Yes.
And are you meaning the Lake Hayes State of the Environment report as the
No,
third
I'm
one,
meaning the
or
your
submission?
the original submission
Yep,
and the lay evidence.
perfect.
When you talk about the brains earlier, I'd like to say that I have a science degree and I have the ability to interpret scientific data, but the brains behind the work we do are Dr. Mark Schellenberg in the University of Otago and various other hydrologist brains and PhD people. So I'm more of an interpreter when it comes to that.
Thank you.
So we understand the need for urban intensification in the district and can see that with it as well, but we don't really understand why we've chosen one of the most sensitive environmental pieces of land in the district to start this process with. The amenity value of the lake's huge, as was pointed out earlier, and I think if we're going to be doing this sort of thing, there's an opportunity to make the people that are going to live in these 2,500 houses and the developers are going to do this work, give them the opportunity to feel proud about standing on the walking track as they walk around the lake and take photos of the views, rather than looking at the brown lake with the algae in it and saying, why did they let this happen? So in the late 90s, when we arrived in the district, we lived on the lakefront. The lake at that point was blue, had regular trout rising, and was in reasonably good condition. Friends of Lake Hayes are saying, okay, what drove that particular lake condition in that particular time? And if you look at it what had happened is the then Catchment Board had invested in this document to come up with a strategy in the late 80s when the lake was terrible, and they implemented it with the 1995 strategy. And that document is available if you want to see that. On top of that, we have very good data from a Caruso report done in 1995 to 1997, which outlines what was going on at the time. So we have a very good understanding of the drivers of that improvement. And as it turned out, there was very low, as you see from that earlier report, one of the lowest loads in sediment and nutrient arriving at the lake was during this period. Then what happened was the RMA came in and the 1995 document was dropped in favour of the RMA and a water plan put in place by the ORC, the then ORC. And this only had nutrient limits in it rather than all the other improvement things in that document, in the 95 document. So what then happened was by 2006, the lake was in a real state. So it took 6-7 years to go back to a really bad state. Lots of dead fish, lots of algae blooms, lots of E. coli and no swims and things like that, which is what prompted the Friends of Lake Hayes to be formed, a group of residents that lived around the lake. I wasn't involved then, but in 2006 is how Friends of Lake Hayes came about. So by the time I became chair in 2016, we had a report on how to go about bringing the lake back and the various options, and we worked with the ORC. And the first thing we did was a study in 1920 to re-establish what the nutrient loads were. And so the results from that study showed the worst we'd ever seen, with 2,000 tonnes of sediment arriving from Mill Creek, and the other areas in the catchment represent somewhere between 10% if you have a look in terms of the catchment, 10% of it lies around the lake in Ladies Mile. We weren't measuring that at the time because we were focusing on the 80%. But just in Lake Hayes alone, 2,000 tonnes of sediment and 2 tonnes of pea. So that's like a top dressing plane 20 times a year, that particular year. It's one of the very bad years we had. So that loaded the lake up with phosphorus for a very long time. So we're stuck with that at the moment, which is why you're seeing these algal blooms going on now. So at the same time, Friends of Lake Hayes started sampling with the ORC. We also introduced our own event sampling. So we've been sampling rain events since then and understand what arrives in rain events and what arrives in the other periods. So we have a very good knowledge built on that stuff. And we also took photos of all these events, including Ladies Mile. So we have quite good photographic evidence from which we base it from. And what we tend to do, we don't ring the ORC helpline or prosecution line. What we do is we talk to people when we take these photos, because sometimes it's in the middle of the night. Most people don't go outside when it rains and look to see what's happening, but we do, and we use it as an education process to get improvement. So I was just, the study confirmed that we were back to where we were in the 80s, really, in terms of the life cycle of the lake health. And that 80% of the volumes, and I'll talk technically in a minute when I talk, because I'll talk about Mark Schellenberg's evidence. I'll talking to that for him, but I'll talk to you about that soon. So we came up with a strategy based on that, which had both physical works and regulatory support and ongoing monitoring as our main elements. So the physical works are briefly, one's about to get turned on. We're going to augment the Lake Mill Creek water with the water coming out of the Arrow irrigation scheme in the spring and the autumn, which will help flush the lake and help keep the stratification period, or we'll push stratification back, and then we get a later anoxic period, which gives us less time for these algae to feed on the phosphorus that gets released in this period. Then on the other side of it is regulatory support, and we've been working with ORC on the Land and Water Plan, and the setting in this current water plan, the aim is to improve the lake health by 1 eutrophic level as a high level objective, and this is mainly driven by sediment load. The main improvement requirement will be stormwater problems and sediment load. So if we're going to ever achieve this, the only way we can do it, we have to strangle that sediment load. So that's what we're endeavouring to do. The interesting thing for me is that the regulatory support side of it, 24.2.4.2, was put into the plan by QLDC as part of the last planning process when we had the same discussion. And everybody recognised the need to do this. And the only way we can improve the lake is when there's change, because we can't do it any other time, because we can't get the support for it. But when we get these increased, intense land use changes, we have to if we're going to succeed, we have to take the opportunity to improve water quality as well, is what we're saying. We're not saying stop doing it, but at least improve the water quality. And at this point, that's not being signalled. We're a bit disappointed that even though we have this strategy management group with QLDC, ORC, iwi, DOC, ourselves, that meet and we're collaboratively implementing these projects, and I might say the QLDC at the working level, the people at the working level are amazingly fantastic and supportive. It's just, it doesn't seem to feed in to what we're talking about here today. There's a link missing. And it just, we're not sure why at this level we haven't been approached by anybody to talk about how we could possibly meet the needs of the lake. The needs of the lake has not been thought about in any of this process. We're talking about how we can mitigate stormwater, but if you're going to create 100 hectares of hard surfaces, how can you ever say you're going to improve stormwater quality? Where on the planet has that ever happened before? There are heaps of reports saying it doesn't. I haven't seen one to show that it does. There's been no evidence behind any of that. So we don't understand where she got that from. Improving water quality making it first dirtier and then improving it may be. And then on top of that, when it runs off-site through a whole lot of other land and at the speed which will rip a lot more stuff out of all of that area as well. So anyway, we've been, the main focus to get the sediment loads down has come from the original Robertson work, where one of the options was, the two options, the serious ones, were putting the wetlands back, and this was written in a day when you could do that. But we were confronted with a situation where it's very difficult now to put back wetlands on top of golf courses and on top of houses and so on. So we're constrained by what we can do. So one of the other options, and it's called, he called it pre-reservoir in his report, is what we call sediment trapping. And it's not an ideal situation, but it is a short-term opportunity to trap the sediment. So we've built some of these traps at the bottom of Coronet Peak. We've got traps on private land at the Roberts property. We've got traps in Millbrook. We've got traps now in Waterfall Park. And we're building one, we're working with ORC to put a polishing trap at the bottom of the creek. So our focus is on the 80% at the moment, but as soon as we've completed that, we are working towards the next regime of all the other stormwater pipes that poke into the lake. As we walk around when it rains, we have got at least another 8 locations flowing off roads, highways, flowing out of people's backyards and stuff like that, which are smaller in volume but definitely significant, and Threepwood and Ladies Mile fit into that regime. So at the end of it, I'll just say that the District Plan Policy 24.2 is working. A good example I wanted to talk about today was the Waterfall Park development, which is a relatively new one that's been operating for the first significant one to work under 24.2.4.2. At Waterfall Park, when they changed their consent from a hotel to a retirement village, triggered 24.2.4.2, and as a result, they sat down with us and constructively worked out some solutions on how they could improve water quality. And there were two things. The first thing was they had originally taken stormwater advice for their road, which they had consent for, and it went ahead, and it didn't work because it failed because of the conditions were different than what the model had shown. So we've already had a major failure. So that's why we're concerned about the stormwater design. And this failure, as a result of this failure, they created that new wetland on the highway, Lake Hayes Arrowtown Highway, on the entrance to Waterfall Park. And that has a pump station in it, which pumps it will be into a big irrigation pond. So the other thing they did was, and we were lucky, but part of the original design that was consented, but for no other reason than looks, was that they slowed the creek down and installed about half a dozen different ponds and weirs, and 3 of these were suitable for cleaning out. So they've put infrastructure, they talked to us and they've put infrastructure in place, which is a hard pipe in this case, which they can connect a suction dredge to. So once a year or earlier, or in long term it might be less often, depending on how quickly it fills, these ponds will be pumped out and dewatered on a separate site. And so they will be taking out significant amounts of sediment through that process. So in the order of 200 tonnes per annum is our estimate. So just saying, so when they engaged with us, they understood the issues in the lake, and they've been working with us to resolve those, not just tell us that don't worry, it won't rain very often. So at the end of that really is what we can't afford to have, I'm just saying, is at the end of it, we're taking out the sediment. We've got to get down to, we estimate, between 200 and 300 tonne a year. We're currently getting, on average, 1,000 tonnes, so we've got to get 750 tonnes of sediment or something like that is our estimate out of the system. Now, we're about to start our first pump out of a pond in Millbrook next month, and it is about 50 metres long and probably 4 metres wide. So, and it's in the time that the ORC have put this pipe in to put the arrow augmentation system in, 1.2 metres of sediment have built up on it when we went to turn it on, to give you an idea. So that's the square meterage times that depth will give you the volume of the sorts of orders of magnitude that'll come out of that. So I just thought that's a bit of context. So I'm going to go into one of my pages on the other page if you want to ask any questions in between.
Just conscious of the timing part and our ability to ask questions as well. But
we've got 2 slots because I'm speaking for Mark as well.
Okay. To the degree you can speak to Mark, etc., we have read everything that's there, but maybe you could just highlight and summarise the key points. The same with yours as well, in terms of the focus, especially for the variation we've got, and what obviously you oppose, but what you'd like or seek for us to do with the key reasons why.
Okay, well, in my summary, I said that, I think, as well in the document. The key thing for us is that if you look at the plan, of the stormwater of the topography that we passed on, you'll see that most of the water from the site, once it flows off the site, ends up filling up McDowell Road. And at the moment, most of that water, you've seen a photograph of it, when it does that, it actually acts as a sediment trap. And it's working very well. And then if you add more water to that and it goes over the top of McDowell Road, it flows down the highway, across grassland, in a channel, because it's the road channel beside the road, and then finds its way to the 2 ravines down into that outstanding natural wetland at the bottom of the hill. That's where it ends up, as the question was earlier. If you have a look at that, I think we've done. What we're suggesting is that the state highway is new to the catchment in terms of it is cut off where a lot of that water would have run. There's an opportunity there to take the risk away. We're saying we could debate what that risk is, whether it's large or how big it is, but it's a climate change type discussion. And how often? And we're saying any sediment into the lake is detrimental. And Mark's stuff, I'll talk to you about that in a minute and confirm that. But there's a very simple opportunity is to just take it under the road. You don't have to dig the road up even, just drill a hole under it. Well, not that I'm an engineer, but the fall is there, the outlet creek is there. All we have to do is remove that. You could even, if they talk to us about the option, you could even look at how you manage that before it hit the outlet creek. There's some room down there to do some stuff, to improve that whole wetlandy area on the other side of the road. So what we're seeking in terms of relief is to take the water out of the catchment, and if you don't do that, well then don't do the development. That's really what we're saying. Then the only other thing, as we mentioned, is that Queenstown QLDC, if they decide to go ahead with this in this format, need to explain to the community why they're prepared to take this risk, having invested all this money at the other end of the lake. And that if they are going to do this, they need to tell us, are they truly committed to improving the lake's health or not? And if this stormwater system fails, who's going to pay the remediation costs associated with this failure? Because up until now, it always seems to land on the ratepayer's lap. So we're saying, well, development's great, but why do the ratepayers have to spend money investing on poor advice, in this case, high-risk advice, no design details on how it will work, no information on what their current baselines are for what is hitting the lake when they say they get improvement from what, etc. So that's our main points in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, are you about to...
I'm just about to go over Mark's briefly. Mark Schellenberg's.
Yes. Now, do we have, beyond obviously the reference to him in the materials and the Lake Hayes State of the Environment report?
You have Appendix 2 in my report.
Appendix 2, yep. Cool. So that's...
I appended it in there.
You mean...
No.
No.
My latest report.
On the website.
No, the Appendix 2 on my report dated 13
December.
December this year that
Thank you.
With this one.
Perfect, yep. So with that one, seeing Mark's not here, etc., maybe just we'd rather have a discussion with you to the degree we can. So just the key highlight points would be fabulous. Thank you. Otherwise, we'll limit the time that we can talk to you about your submission.
So I'll just say that point 4, phosphorus is bound to the suspended sediments in catchment soils. It's self-evident. And phosphorus is released from the lake bed sediments, which historically entered the lake. Point 5, suspended soils. So anything that extra that goes in from Ladies Mile ends up on the lake bed and is amongst the existing sediment and causes the tip over point. If the lake tips back, then we have to get it. We have to sort that out long term. So then point 6, reduction of phosphorus loads is key. And then I think the key point then is the graph in Fig 1. If you look at that, that is 2020's annual phosphorus load and annual P load. And you'll see there 3 weather events in the year. So, and on average, about 80% of the phosphorus and sediment arrives in the 3 events. So you see that the problem isn't the fancy stormwater mitigation systems, it's the 1 or 2% of the times that we get failure that loads the lake up. That's the key point there. So we have all these flash systems, and Waterfall Park was an example of that. They put all these flash stormwater systems in. As soon as we got a heavy rain, the heavy rain is so strong, it rips all the sediment out of the swaling, it rips all the sediment out of these other things they've built, and it just loads up the creek more. So instead of getting it as an even line, we get it in big lumps. And it looks good until we get one of these events. And most people are asleep when these events happen, so that everyone's happy. so, except the lake. So those are the key points in there, thanks.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to questions. Judith? No? Oani?
I probably have a couple, and I'll start with your last point, and it might actually be a request for Mr. Brown in regard to those other stormwater engineered solutions. Are they engineered to a 1% AEP, so 1 in a 100-year event, which is what we anticipate happening here for the Ladies Mile?
So what happens is it's the opposite way around. Because we're extracting sediment out of ponds, it's imperative that we clean the ponds out before those events. So if we miss the cleaning and the event happens, then yes, it won't work. But generally, once a year, we get it out before the wet season. We will make sure that it happens. It's not really related to that.
And with the stormwater experts we were talking with last week, it was around ensuring that reanimation of contaminants and sediments in those bigger events were dealt with as well. So is that what you're effectively saying you're doing by cleaning out the sumps and the ponds prior to big events so that
But you'll find the sediment doesn't just lie in things in sumps. It lies all over the place. It's a very dusty environment. So we haven't got the data for that. We haven't modelled that. So
that's first flush events.
So the first flush generally works, but if there's sediment build up on surfaces as part of that process, that will all end up in the lake. And then, as well as you say, the increase in area and hard surface, the lake, the creek itself, the volume in the creek is getting less and less, and the runoff events are growing as we build more surfaces. So.
No, I'm good. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Gillian?
Several questions for you. So earlier you said that this part of the catchment represents about 10% of the input to the lake. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the non-Mill Creek.
Yeah. Non-Mill
Yeah.
Creek. So on the eastern side of Lake Hayes, there's settlement, there's homes down there. What's the stormwater management in that area?
There isn't really any.
So what happens when it rains?
That's what we're working on.
Right.
It's straight into the lake.
Okay. No, it just would have been helpful to understand with another sort of semi-urban area, obviously
Yeah.
different.
But
level.
it was settled earlier, and it's under a different set of rules. So
Right.
no, as far as I'm aware, there is no treatment to the runoff. There is controls in terms of around building,
Right.
but the controls are rules that nobody measures to see how effective they are when it rains.
Okay. So your main concern with this plan is really around the generation of sediment and at the times that the stormwater system is overwhelmed. Is that right?
That's correct.
Right. So I'm not sure how much of the hearing you've been listening to in terms of stormwater solutions. So have you heard that the proposal is to put most of all of the stormwater to ground up to the 1% AEP?
Yes,
You have caught up.
I've heard that sort of thing before, and we've had failures.
Right.
But we're saying there's a risk of failure with that. Why are we taking this risk when it's unnecessary?
So I guess there's a risk. You always work back from a risk. So this is using the 1% or the 1 in 100.
Yeah, but we're
year
not
event.
comfortable with the 1%.
So what would you be comfortable with?
We just don't want any more sediment in the lake because we're trying to dig it out at the other end as fast as we can. We're putting it in the other end at any percentage. We can't tolerate anymore. We're trying to get it down.
So my question is, if we were to design a system that
Right.
avoided any sediment to the lake, what size event would we be generating that for?
Sorry?
Sorry, what size event would we be designing that for you to be satisfied that there would be no sediment?
Well, we don't need to if we can take it out. It's probably easier to take it out. It might even be cheaper
To take it, sorry?
to take it out of the catchment.
To take the stormwater out of the catchment
Yeah.
altogether?
Yeah.
And is that where your suggestion of taking it to the other side of State Highway 6 was
Yes,
coming
that's out of the catchment.
Right.
The other side of State Highway 6 is all out of the catchment.
And that's networked, isn't it? That is and then discharges down to the river, is that right?
I'm not sure, but it's not I haven't looked at that part of it.
Okay.
We haven't approached it from an engineering approach. We've just taken a view that it is possible to move it out of the catchment relatively easily. So why take a risk of putting more into the lake?
No, that's fine. Thanks for the clarification on that.
Just quickly, I have a non-expert question on that. Isn't that just moving the problem somewhere else? If you're not discharging to the lake, but you're discharging to another water body, you're just
Yes, but
moving the problem.
we're taking the risk because you're saying that you're going to treat it to a 1% level, but we have no risk if we do that. So it may not even flow, is what you're saying.
No, I'm asking.
But there's no risk to the downstream because we've got a at risk lot. We've got a water body that is already sick and at risk.
Right. Okay.
So, and it's very sensitive to that sort of thing.
So
The
the
risk
river
on the
is
other
less-
side of the road is, yes, it's there, but it is not the same risk in term for Lake Hayes.
because it's not as sensitive.
Yeah, and if you look at
Thank
some of
you.
the projects, some of the Ministry of Works projects in the 50s were diverting the Mill Creek right round the lake straight out.
I just needed to
So,
understand that
yeah.
relative sensitivity.
Yeah,
of the
sure.
water. Thank you.
I've just got one final question, and that's around, and I'm not sure of timing here because I'm not local, in terms of the effects or the generation of sediment during construction phases. Has that been a problem for the lake when there's been
Yes.
pulses?
Yes, that 2,000 tonne bad year was one of the highest development periods in the...
Right.
Without being specific where it came from, those mitigation things all leak, and that's clearly what happens, because that was the period. And it's come back. We've done a lot of good work since then. We're way down from where we are already. We've still got a long way to go. But because of all this sediment extraction going on, where the creek is finally down to a level most of the time where it's now below 3 NTUs.
So it's the conditions of having bare, exposed
It's-
soils that's the biggest risk.
Yeah, and also, no, it's the dusty environments that we live in. If you work out how many kilos per square metre of roof, how much silt is generated on every roof, it's quite high, just from the environment we live in. A lot of it, it's not only that risk, it's coming from lots of different things. We have a dry summer, we get a rain event, we get a huge amount of sediment off that first flush off that after a dry summer.
Thank you.
I have one more, and this is in relation to understanding the opportunity that Ladies Mile will provide to deal with the stormwater that's there compared to the status quo remaining where there would be no opportunity to deal with it as it runs off, and just trying to understand from your perspective whether you have some plan to deal with. There's no change to Ladies Mile and it continues in the way it currently is with open farmland and those sort of things, large storm events, washing all that along the surface as opposed to under a new zoning requiring everything up to that 1 in 100 event to go to ground and reducing the contaminant load that moves towards the lake. Is that not an opportunity that we should be considering on behalf of the lake?
Yes.
Or is there something else that you could be doing if there's no change?
As I said earlier, the focus has been on the 80%. We've only just getting traction, and in the last 3 years we've done a heap of work. We're really just in beginning this journey, and part of the water plan, land and water plan for ORC is that QLDC are going to have to map all of their stormwater and understand those risks, and that will be part of that. And yes, we've worked with Threatwood, and we've put some simple sediment traps at the end of a culvert to at least start the process off. Things like that. So we're doing as much as we can. We'll be getting out when it's raining, and we'll be looking to see what the problems are and addressing it. Yes. And then what that means will be something down by the lake or improving that. And it depends where it is in the wetland, whether there's the room there to do something. Because one of the other things that we've got to keep the anoxic settled water on the wetland out of the lake as well. So, we don't want to create more problems for ourselves, so,
No, I've got that.
yeah.
Thank you. Just to be clear on your answer to what you were just asked about if there's the opportunity to consider to do better,
Yeah.
you agreed that yes, we should take that?
Yes, we're trying to improve. Because the other thing we can do, as I mentioned in the report that you'll read, is that it doesn't have to be off-site. We've got opportunities at the other end of the lake which haven't happened yet. There's potential wetlands to be built. There's all sorts of off-site opportunities that could help.
And we're being told by the experts that there will be improvement in terms of the runoff from the site. So you'd encourage
From what
us
base
to
load is that? Improvement of what?
the status quo. So there'd be reduced, because we're now going to the 1 in 100,
What is the status quo?
somewhere around 1 in 50 to 1 in
No, but
above.
that's the rainfall, not how much sediment arrives at the lake.
I'm
Because we're not improving from anything. I can't see there's no data provided to substantiate. That's more of an opinion.
So you're worried if it's not raining, then the dust, or
I'm worried that when it rains any time, I'm just saying at the moment they're improving. A certain amount of sediment arrives at the lake at the moment from this land, but we don't actually understand what that is.
Yep.
So I don't know how you can measure an improvement from it.
Well, what I was meaning is there will be a reduction in the weather events that will create an overland flow towards Lake Hayes. So instead of an overland flow at a lower, more frequent weather event, it will now only be at the 1 in 100 event.
Yeah. Look, we would rather take the risk out of this. It would probably be cheaper to take the risk out by diverting it.
And diverting into the Kawerau River.
Or diverting to the outlet creek or the Kawerau, depending whatever the best solution is. But yes, on the other side of the highway.
And the latest policy wording is to avoid the adverse effects of stormwater on Lake Hayes by, and then there's a list of matters. Do you support that approach of avoiding adverse effects on the lake for this subdivision?
The latest wording, I'd say I'm not sure of the latest wording. Is it different than the one that I've got?
Well, it might well be, but it's got avoid the adverse effects of stormwater on Lake Hayes. Is that an outcome that you'd support for a large subdivision?
Well, that's the only one we have. If that's that's. So in terms of, if you look at each one individually, yes, but if there's an option that's avoid by taking it out, then we would prefer to do that, obviously. And I think what should happen is that developers and councils should talk through the collaborative approach of the group of people with our experts there to resolve those sort of discussions. That's where it needs to happen, and it needs to be the best solution. If you decide that it's possible, then yes,
And in your, one of them, which one am I on? In your memorandum, this is going back to it's not the memorandum. Go back up to the top of the document. The submission, I'm getting muddled between the submission and your summary today. In your submission, you have a series of photos of Mill Creek discharging. You also have, there's a few photos of the southern end of the lake, which is where we're interested in. And one is it's figure 9, recently constructed stormwater culvert and channel next to Threepwood at the western end of the lake.
Yeah.
You're familiar with that? You don't
Yeah.
need it in front of you.
No, I'm familiar with that.
So what treatment does that water discharge get before that goes into the lake there?
Well, that's a bone of contention with us, because very little. We added something to that to try and contain some of that sediment, so it gets minimal treatment through a small sediment trap at the end of it. It's something we've been trying to improve, and once again, it is. I think there's a video there that shows you it running. there may be a video behind that.
And do you know off the top of your head what sort of weather event that was that created that flow?
That was about, I think it was a 5 cubic. I don't know percentage terms, but that happens probably. It's not only if you have a look at the date, I think the ground was frozen where it came from. It's not the size of the flood, it's the other circumstances as well as it's the runoff. No, and we don't have percentages we run in. I just know how big the creek is, because it gives me an indicator of the runoff.
Thank you. Now, any further questions from the panel? I've got no more, so thank you very much for your submission.
Appreciate the time for you.
And thank you too for the photos, etc., because they do, picture tells 1,000 words, and it's the picture too that you had of the 1960s versus today, etc., was the comparator was interesting, to say the least.
So thank you, and all I can say is please don't allow any more sediment into the lake.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
and we've heard that loud and clear. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now, we are back with the Anna Hutchinson Trust, and Mr. Winchester, we've got, in terms of timing, etc., we've got half an hour or so we can maybe play around. Over to you, but maybe we go direct to Mr. Murray and get through that, but there may be some introduction comments, etc., that you'd like to make?
No, there are not, sir. I'm happy. I think Mr. Murray's followed the issues closely and has thought about them carefully, so I think it's best that you get on with him. Obviously, I had some homework to do, and you did mention the possibility of scope issues rearing their head again, and I'm happy to deal with that if we have time.
What we might do is get through Mr. Murray, then come back to you.
Okay.
And then we've got those yellow bits of time this afternoon that you mentioned. Though my hope is we will try and avoid that, because we'll get through Mr. Murray quite quickly, given the discussions we've already had.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Judith?
I have no questions, thank you.
That's
Good start.
Puani?
No, I have no questions.
Gillian?
No.
It's looking good.
Ian?
You've been extremely flexible with your availability, and I know you've been in and out and you've heard a lot of the discussion that's been had with other witnesses, and you'll have heard the various questions I've asked about how do certain things happen, and most recently I asked Mr. Ware how densities might be managed if something around 40 couldn't be achieved. Well, does that mean you abandon a rule, or do you just have a consent framework to still try and get as close to it as possible? So without trying to go through my notes and put 15 questions to you that I've put to other witnesses, as you've listened and you've heard, do you just have any general comments that you want to just make to those matters that you've heard discussed?
general comments is broad. There's a lot of things. I've got a lot of notes.
Well, if you think the provisions are awesome.
No. I'll go down the path, and you might have more questions that come into your mind. But I think the bit of homework that you gave me last week, or earlier in the week, was firstly to look at the connection between the land use and the subdivision. And I did think that there was a connection, and I did speak to Mr. Brown, and I think there is a connection. I think it's a good connection. I've tested this, so I've got the, hang on, I'll get there. I've tested this, remembering I've got the benefit of having actually designed Flint's West. I've been down the design pathway. I've looked at those sneaky ways that you can maybe get this, maybe get that. And I mean, they're just ways that the plan, doors, I guess, that the plan leave you that you can push against. And so I've looked at the plan again with that in mind. And my view has always been that, to me, this zone is about encouragement. Encouraging people to build affordably, to get the market, to get more houses there. I came at this from the sort of chapter 3 and chapter 4 that says, go and look where there are existing urban settlements, then grow from there. And if you go a little bit further under a future plan change, well, that might happen. But for now, we'll just grow in those little steps. And so with that in mind, I think there are some changes, Commissioner Monroe, that you would need to make to that framework. But if you keep in mind the enablement, and I think for me, what's come out of this process is people are quite keen to have flexibility. There are unknowns here. And just one thing that I'll just take you down that path, the western end, there are unknowns. I've tried to design Flint's Park West. There are paper roads there. Now, when I designed for Flint's Park West, the advice that I had, because I tried to work, as a planner, I do try to work very closely with council if I can. And so we were like, this is a brand new master plan, let's work as closely as we can. The collector road could not move. That was it, could not move. And I was like, okay, well, what do I do? Because there are already paper roads there. Who's going to close those? How do I close them? What happens to, and I know that this morning there was a discussion about Spence Road. Well, that's state highway, so we can't connect to that. Even though it looks like a road, it's not owned by the council. So all of those issues actually exist. And for me, what was helpful was a level of flexibility. And I think that Mr. Brown, and I know that the connection is tenuous for now, and I think that definitely we can, that can be sort of worked through to get it clear. But that was the point for me, was that you have land use rules and you connect them to subdivision rules, because otherwise you come in with a land use, and I think we talked about 100 square metre commercial that could be got depending on how you did your subdivision. But the way that I see the rules working is that you have these subdivision requirements that you need to answer at land use, with the expectation being that you're going to do some kind of master plan. You're going to do, at least I'm going to know, I might not tell the council, but I'm going to have a master plan over here because I just want to do stage 1 for now and see how it goes. So I think that the information that Mr. Brown has in that information requirements, and it's been growing, mine's grown. It may be overly onerous, but we have a lot of issues to deal with here. That information is going to be there however you lodge it. So if you lodge a land use consent, you've got to provide all the stuff you'd need at subdivision. All the stormwater stuff we're talking about, stormwater management plans, I think we're talking about, and I'll make terms up here because we haven't actually got there yet, but there might be a density management plan, there may well be a traffic management plan. All of those things will have to be thought through for your land holding. And I'm sort of suggesting as well, and Commissioner Monroe, stop me when I'm jumping to sort of too far, but I'm suggesting that maybe we put even a consent notice framework in place so that when you, because I was thinking, okay, what if I did a super lot and I wanted to get density there, but I think I heard somewhere someone saying that would be there could be a gaming of, for a lack of a better word, you do your low density first because that's easy and you leave high density, it never comes back. So if you're having, and Mr. Brown's put an information requirement in that you've got to address density, if you've got to do that, and this is what we did or are proposing with the Flint's Park application that is in front of the fast track panel at the moment, to have super lots that get created, and there's actually a density range. Well, no, we've moved away from density then because we know the overall density. There's a dwelling number per super lot, and that number, here's your super lotter, Mr. Developer or Mr. Builder. There's a consent notice that goes with, you've got to deliver 13 to 15 houses on that super lot, you've got to live 20 to 23 on that super lot. That keeps you in that. And of course, you don't have to do that because you can go and do a discretionary activity to vary your consent notice. But that's a very difficult thing to do. And as case law develops, it's getting harder and harder to do. So I think that the bones are there. I think that the way that these things are going to be developed, hearing about flexibility and people not knowing how the market's going to go, it will be possibly super lots. It might be chunks of development and see how you go. And I think that that is what Mr. Brown, because this isn't new to Mr. Brown, we've talked about this through the master plan process. How do we be flexible with density? And you'll see there were density ranges and averages, and as Mr. Weir said before, there was a shift in density. It's been very fluid, and for me, our job could be very easy. Here's your density, done. And that's a rule, and it's in there. But I think that where this plan can and should go is that you give this flexibility. With a lot of reporting we heard from the Lake Hayes group before, that how do we know what the baseline is? Well, that stormwater report might capture that at the beginning, and that sets your roadmap for development of your particular parcel of land. Because this would, of course, this problem would essentially evaporate if there was one landowner. Because you'd have an overall master plan and a strategy, and that would be consented. But even in that, there's still risk if you are sitting on the council side, because someone can come and do a variation at any time. So I think we do, if we go into this process thinking people are going to seek flexibility, there are going to be problems that we just cannot foresee right now, then I think the provisions where Mr. Brown is sitting is quite a good starting point. I did think about maybe adding some extra words in the front, and also I will say, Mr. Brown, I took your homework on board and went and looked at the current plan, and there are other zones that do have these subdivision requirements. It's not a made-up bit, it's section 27.1 in the plan, in the subdivision chapter, and they do have, there are many sensitive zones around the district. This is just another one, and it probably has potentially more sensitivities than others. But that's a really long-winded way to say I did the homework. I think with tweaking and taking on board what people have said, it's not just I did give you did I pass out or just a little taster, if you like, of provisions that I was just jotting down. It's not all of them, but I just tried to test to see if something we've talked about could drop into the provisions quite neatly, and I think they can. So you don't have to go, I guess what I'm saying is you don't have to go, oh, goodness, we didn't think about this concept, where does it all fit? I think the way that this is written at the moment, there's a structure there for us to drop things in quite easily. And as you'll probably note through the evolution of this, Mr. Brown has done quite a lot of work on stormwater, and that's dropped in there fairly neatly. Density might drop in fairly neatly. And then potentially preempting what you're thinking, the plans, I think the plans that go along with this are also key. So you said before about the height plan. Maybe there's a density and its heights. It's just the height plan. That's all we've got to change. So from my perspective, and Mr. Brown might have a different view, that's quite an easy thing to change for us planners. The thinking that you guys have to do that goes into the height plan is maybe a bit more complicated. But from the plan architecture side of it, it's quite easy, I think, to put in there once there's a decision.
Okay. Mr. Brown ultimately is an independent planner for the council.
Yes.
He's not going to write provisions for you. And
I'm happy. I've got homework. I'm happy to write my provisions, yes, and I'm happy to run them past Mr. Brown.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So in terms of that side of things, in fairness, there's very little we can productively work with you until we see that, and then when we see it, it's probably going to be after the close of this part of the hearing anyway. So, just based on what you've said, I would probably indicate the need for quite a bit of supporting analysis to convince me that a consent notice type framework could work. Because the first thing that enters my mind is a person buys a super lot with a requirement for 5 houses, builds one house, saying I'll build the other 4 later, and hey presto, I've got a great house on a big garden that no one can make them do anything else ever. And if we were to support the zone, along the lines of what the council's proposed, which is about achieving a certain density, either we can be convinced that there are measures that will achieve that density, or we probably have to say to the minister, this is a great idea, but there's nothing stopping it being the distant Lake Hayes North, and that might not be appropriate. So that's not to say supportive or not, or disbelieve or don't. It's just I think because of the enabling nature of resource consents, and if we can't have a rule in the plan that says thou shalt build X, I don't see how we just kick the touchdown.
No, there is, in the land use part, there is that rule.
And that's that minimum density.
Yes, totally.
But if a developer doesn't have to just achieve that with every resource consent, what I'm saying is I'd be looking for you, if you're promoting the method, and maybe it's Mr. Brown if he comes to that view too, I'm just signalling to you all, because I'm not going to have a chance to ask you questions of information that's going to come to me at a later date. All I can say is, while you're doing it, don't just say, here's a rule we think is good. I'm indicating to you that I've got a bit of scepticism about how deferring the delivery of density through consent notices or subdivision or whatever, I'm just saying I'd need quite a bit of analysis and assessment from whoever explaining how it works, why we can depend on it. That's all I can do, and that shouldn't be indicated as any suggestion of a position I've reached on it. It's just I can immediately see someone saying, I'll just build my density requirement to what I want to do and say I'll do the rest later. And I don't see what we do with that. Maybe I've got it wrong. And
so is that I guess just because I didn't think about it or come at it from that sort of angle. The way that I saw this was it's medium density. So there isn't, and look, I can just tell you from where I've landed trying to design for this, there was never, and I think there'd be a very low possibility that anyone who will buy a section in here will go to GJ Gardens and get one house built. It's just not, it's not how any of the stuff that's happened recently have happened. If you look at the classic builders site, which I think Mr. Weir talked about before, it's a builder. So for us developing super lots on Flint's Park, the idea is that you go to builder number A, company, not mum and dad, and you go away and design 10 to 12 dwellings that fit on that. You do a resource consent and you do that. If you put one house on there, I don't know if the council's going to approve that. So you'll be stuck with a house plan and a super lot, but you won't be able to build it. So that's I guess what I was getting at the architecture, yeah.
So just draw that out as part of supporting the rationale, which we could include broadly under the umbrella of Section 32AA type evaluation of how you think whatever method you land on can be relied on.
Is that, I guess, I just want to be clear for my homework because there might be a bit more. I thought that was how the plan was currently sitting, as it's...
No, I'm responding to a comment you made, which was maybe there's a super lot regime, which I haven't seen anything in the plan
I was just saying that someone could do a super lot and under these rules, but still be locked in to deliver 5 houses.
So what I'm saying to you is what stops someone buying that super lot, building one house in a way that doesn't foreclose the other 4 at some unspecified Never Land date.
Because of Mr. Brown's connection with the land use that has to connect with the super lot in the end, or with the lot, or the whole development.
Which means whenever someone develops a lot, they have to deliver all of the density up front.
Yes, on that lot. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'd imagine that you'd only ever have one house on that lot while you're waiting for the next one to be built, and the next one, and the next one.
Okay.
From a consenting perspective, there's nothing
as
that's going to stop someone from doing a variation.
Okay. Currently, and again, let's put aside the high density zone for now, just the medium density zone seems to be where there's the least difference.
Yes.
The council's position is 40 dwellings a hectare minimum. The suggestion from the submitter is something less than that. I haven't quite understood whether that's an alternative 35 or something less than 35 up to 35, in which case, to be blunt, I'm just going to start with the lowest number that the rule requires. So what is it? in your view? What is the alternative to a minimum of 40?
So if I could start, I don't want to do chapter and verse of history, but just my...
I know, I want your
experience.
recommendation,
Yes,
what you think the
I
minimum
think
should be.
it was a push for us to get to about 23 to 29. This all happens in chunks. I think you mentioned Bridesdale before. I don't think that those houses could be built under this plan because they're freestanding. So, but that was very high at the time. So now we're sitting at 23 to 29. And I do think that this plan should push us to the next level. So I think if you're sitting in, and that's why, look, and I know we didn't have a lot of time on Monday, but I was trying to preempt this question, that if we're on a zone, or if we're looking at a zone-wide provision, that 40 is the number, because that's what the traffic engineers have decided. Then could we put 40 as an average and let us go unders and overs so that over your whole site you're there? And the reason for that is I think that the number is probably between 30 and 35, 30, 35, somewhere there. And just to be clear, I thought that these provisions were gross developable area as defined in this plan. So there are areas already that have been taken out, like the big roads and all of that sort of stuff, because I know that that was an initial complaint that we had. That was like, well, if we have to give a big road away and we have to give a park away, suddenly you've got to achieve 40 dwellings a hectare on this little postage stamp. So I have tried to reflect on that, and I think that a good number would be 30. Would fit where we are now. If we pushed higher, maybe 33. If we pushed higher, 40, but for unders and overs could possibly work. But again, I'd have to defer to economic evidence on that. Just I haven't seen it, that's all.
So the idea of, instead of a minimum of 40, an average of 40.
Potentially.
And you said maybe on one side of that is 35 or 33, and on the other side might be more than that.
Yes.
Would that be every landowner to deliver, or would you be saying it's across the zone and it's someone else's problem to do the higher stuff?
No, I think, and that's again coming back to how I think Mr. Brown's got the provisions working. If you've got your land there, you need to think about that before you do one thing from, if this was approved tomorrow, you've got to think about that tomorrow.
Okay.
And sorry, that I know that it's difficult for me to bring in a very short amount of time where my thinking is being in the detail of it, but that's what I was thinking about consent notices. So if you've got your site now, you design it so you've got your 40 a hectare, everything's there, consent notices sit on there, whoever buys it, they've got land uses, they've got everything there, and they just go ahead and develop. And if they want to change, they've got to go through a restricted discretionary regime to do that. Yep.
Sure. Okay. I understand your recommendations better than I did 10 minutes ago, but I think I am ultimately, until we get review lands, I don't think I can go any further. So, but look, again, I really appreciate you've been so patient, willing to almost come and then stop, and then almost come back and then stop. I certainly do appreciate it, and you've been really good-humoured about it too. Thank you.
I do have a question I forgot about, so apologies for that. Hopefully it's a very straightforward one and is a yes or no answer. I was asking Mr. Winchester earlier in the week around the direct notification of parties affected by the Anna Hutchinson Family Trust extension.
Yep.
And I had a question around whether the land affected by the proposed roading changes, so that would be if you go to...
It's the western end?
Yep, at the western end.
Yep, yes.
So where the roundabout used to be, coming
Yes.
off Stalker Road, and is going up to this nice complex little
Yes.
road network.
Yes.
Have they been notified and consulted directly?
Yes, is the short answer, but I will just expand a little bit if that's okay. So I have been doing design over that site for a while because Flint's Park was part of it. So conversations with that landowner about where roads could go, because I think Mr. Bartlett confessed to you that the current layout is his great mistake. And in the Flint's Park West proposal, talking to NZTA Council and all that sort of stuff, why would we leave this intersection when really we want a square or as close to a 90 degree as possible? So look, and that landowner was obviously involved with that process, yeah.
So in terms of the parties listed in Appendix C of Mr. Winchester's legal submissions, can you tell me who that party is?
That's Mr. Mike Henry. Is he on there? So look, we did, and then, sorry, the next part of that is we've been speaking with Mr. Henry in terms of, hey, we're doing this, just keeping you informed. We didn't follow a strict RMA process notification.
Okay.
Yeah. Because of course, you'd notice a difference then in the parties that are listed there, because some we did have formal letters dropped. We went to Joe's garage and sat around a table and talked about options. So some that were directly affected were obviously consulted in a more formal RMA manner, if you like, whereas the ones that were designed on their land before with change, because they've just, it probably doesn't matter, but with the Flins Park West, there was a school proposed on that as well.
Okay, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Thank you. Now, just some quick questions from me, and they're more understanding the provisions that you are after.
Yes.
There's provisions in the submission,
Yes.
and there was a sort of series of saddleback, and I'll just call them saddleback sort of plans
Yes.
that showed a development. Things have changed over time.
Yes.
That's fine. That
Yes.
always happens. We now have the latest structure plan.
Yes.
And I'm just trying, like that structure plan doesn't show any setbacks off escarpments, etc. It
Yes.
doesn't show a lot of the detail that was shown on the earlier plans.
Yes.
And then the provisions right back at the submission, which was right back in the day, are fairly high level as well. I'm just at a loss as to where the provisions are that will click with the structure plan and Mr. Brown's summary, paragraph 9, where, and I realise there's a whole history here, but it seems very fair enough to me for Mr. Brown to set out in paragraph 9 what is happening with all of these things when, to my reading, there is no connection, so I can absolutely understand why he's given us that summary. So I'm just interested in quickly understanding where the provisions are at and how they're fitting together with the current version of the proposed structure plan that we've got. And it might just be a quick answer, it's a work in progress.
Yes, but
etc.
maybe an update to the work, because that might
Cool,
help.
thank you.
So I gave, or I've circulated just a little, it's just a table. Look, it doesn't look like Mr. Brown's. I thought it might just be easy. It doesn't look like the current provision version that that version that has made a few changes, which is the current provision. It doesn't look like that, but the document that I sent does correspond. So if you scroll down,
Wait on, I just want to, I've got so many documents now.
I think you have it. I hope so.
Which particular document's this one?
It's maybe,
Updated provisions,
Yes.
Glen Panel and AH
that's the one.
13th. Cool. I've now got it open 3 times. That's why I shouldn't use a computer. Cool. Thank you.
And look, this is potentially why I did have that little diatribe about the provisions and how they work. So if you scroll down to chapter 27, subdivision on there, or what
Yep.
is that, probably around page 3. I think the key, what I'm after with the final version of this plan that Saddleback have drawn is something, just the things that you must have, not the things that are nice to have. So this is about drilling down through that. So at X is what I've called it, and you can see hopefully a whole lot of underlined red provisions. Now those provisions apply to area K1 and K2. So in the structure plan, that's obviously will then have to be a must. There's an area K1, which is the low density roughly, and the area K2, which is the medium density. And those provisions would correspond. So if you looked at A, for example, that answers the question that you asked specifically about the distance from the escarpment. Location of future buildings and appropriateness of lot sizes along the escarpment. There was just a little bit, the reason I don't have 20 metres there, because that's the number, the hard number, is there was some discussion, because what has happened in the meantime is, as you are probably aware, the lower terrace behind the Ferry Hotel was originally inside the submission area, that was pulled back. So that buffer planting was originally to mimic the buffer planting that the council was going to have on the other side of Shotover Road. So a lot of this work, I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, because I know that obviously makes it harder from a plan architecture perspective. So I was like, well, the council have a buffer area there, we'll put a buffer area here. That way it's the same on both sides. But then when the land pulled back, the buffer pulled all the way up onto the top of the terrace. And so the reason I don't have 20 metres in there is because I just have an outstanding question for the urban design landscape tension. If there's 10 metre high planting and all the rest from the buffer provision, then would that affect the 20 metres? At this point in time, I think that A will say 20 metres. So that is how I intended the connection to work, is that anything in K1 and then coming back to the plan architecture of it, is it subdivision, is it land use, when do you put it in? I have taken some ideas from the Arrow South. Look, I've taken quite a lot of ideas from the Arrow South zone. So the Arrow South zone, just as an example, there's a black dotted line that goes down the terrace. Now the Arrow South zone has exactly the same pedestrian connection, down a terrace from the lower part of Arrowtown up to the upper part of Arrowtown. And so, again, I didn't want to reinvent the wheel on a lot of this stuff. So that's the pathway that I envisaged, and the provisions are the same. And how that worked was that at your first subdivision, you have to prepare a landscape plan, tell us who's going to manage it, how does it work, when's it going to be put in, and that's obviously approved by the council, and that's how the development commences. So again, I wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel, I was merely just copying the zone provisions from also the Frankton Flats zone. That type of provision in a plan change where there's an issue identified, fairly well known, go away and do a management plan or similar. And I thought that this plan change already has quite a heavy management plan requirement. I think that it's going to take 12 months to get the first application prepared anywhere on this zone because of the management plan requirements. And look, this will just have some more management plan requirements, and that's where they will sit.
Thank you. That's helpful from that perspective. And just one thing, not that I want to go into micro on it, but along the escarpment edge.
Yes.
You're only thinking the top escarpment, are you? Or you're thinking that there's two escarpment edges, as I see it,
Yes.
Rather than one?
Yes.
So you're saying that the lower escarpment build right up to it, but at the upper one build back, or at both?
So if you get into the detail of, there's a very tiny little escarpment, which isn't really an escarpment, it's just a little setback where the fence is. There's currently landscaping in there. So one of the requirements is also, when you do that first landscape plan, what is going to be your strategy for the sort of sequential removal of the weed species trees and the replanting of native or other? And that will be in the bottom area. You'll see on the structure plan, I think it's on the one in front of you, there is another planting zone. So it won't be, so that one is different. That's more a screen planting or weed removal / renewal planting, whereas that buffer edge, the idea, they could be the same, but I guess for me the buffer edge was to tie in with the council's buffer edge, because then the plan change has the end. It's the same on both sides. So that was, it looked a little nuanced, but that was how I thought that would work.
Thank you. Well, I'll leave you to your homework, and then we'll see the outcome of it and have to consider it that way. So thank you very much. Just reiterating from what Mr. Munro's already said, thank you for your assistance and time.
Yep.
And just being flexible.
And if I could, I know we've traversed this a lot, if I could just add that western end, I know that it looks quite different now, but none of either does the western end work by itself, does the Hutchinson Trust work by itself, do they work together? None of what's in that plan, it turns on that. Those are kind of nice to haves if you think about it. So the Spence Road, it's a road corridor that's flat. Isn't that a good spot for houses if you can put a road somewhere else? That's the thinking. If it doesn't happen like that, it can happen in many, many other ways. We did, or us as a team did try to just capture all the constraints that there were. And on the western end, there are a lot. Someone's going to have to work through them, whether we leave it as it is or whether we change it. The western end is going to be tricky.
Yep. Well, we'll leave that for your homework. So thank you.
No problem.
Now, Mr. Winchester, and I'm conscious of afternoon tea time and next submitters and things, but Mr. Winchester, you talked about conferencing earlier. I think we'll leave it in the hands of the parties just given time with Christmas. Obviously, we encourage everyone to engage, but I think formalised conferencing, etc. We've got the evidence, we've got the issues. Density is very much in play, but we've said a number of times, if people can resolve things, that's great. If they can't, we'll make the decision on the evidence that we've got. So thank you for raising that, because we do keep encouraging that ongoing discussion. So that was our thinking on that. There is, Gillian's just got a couple of questions for Mr. Ladbroke that we might just do in writing and just ask for a written answer, just because of him coming on for the Glen panel. We just missed a few questions there, so we'll circulate those tomorrow. And then in terms of your legal subs, because rather than sort of jumping up and back and forth, etc. this afternoon, it's very helpful to have those, thank you, in the Chapman trip issues. Just a lot of it hinges on the context and the facts and back into the spatial planning days and what was proposed, etc. And I'm just keen on your thoughts. There was a comment, which now, of course, I won't be able to find, in terms of the position whereby, where is it? How important and how fair is it, just so I've got clarity on your view of the importance of fairness, of an old spatial plan draft did include the variation area. There is the focus area, I think it's called, under the master plan that runs down State Highway 6 and includes a part of the area. And just in taking those and then expanding them in a context argument, from your perspective, just the sort of fairness, robustness of processes that always sort of ebb in and ebb out as you go through a spatial master plan, structure plan process.
Well, my submission on that, sir, is that this has had a lengthy gestation process, and it has involved a lot of public engagement and public processes. The council has placed significant weight itself on the master plan process in terms of justifying where it has got to, justifying the robustness of the variation, justifying the quality of consultation undertaken, indicating that with regard to the area of focus, that there were certain mandatory steps that should be adopted in terms of the level of analysis. And yet, despite that, you get to the variation, and that the stuff that the council said it would do, it did not. And so from a fairness point of view, the council is saying, well, this is a significant addition to the variation area, not foreshadowed. My answer to that, wrong, as a matter of fact. The second thing they say is it's a significant area and should have had a Section 32 analysis, and that counts against the relief. Answer on the facts, wrong, because the council should have done it. So it becomes self-fulfilling and belts my client over the head in terms of scope. If history is correctly followed and applied, what more could my client have reasonably done to get its relief on the radar? It took every available step that was open to it and has been faced with a consultant team that deliberately, and that is the only thing, the only word I think that fits, has just turned a blind eye to something it said it would and should consider. So in terms of fairness, as I say in my submission, it cuts both ways. People who are alive to the urbanisation of the Eastern Corridor must have known what my client intended. And those that didn't got direct service. So I say there is no unfairness, there's no submissional sidewind, because as a matter of fact, the corridor being assessed, and it's been described in various ways, and Chapman Tripp have been through, all as a matter of fact, include the extension area. So it is plainly in the mix.
So your comment about would and should deliver, that's tied back to the spatial planning and then that master plan focus area rationale in terms of a factual matrix?
Well, yes, because the master plan, in terms of what it said it would do and what the council would do with the area of focus, it effectively stated it in mandatory terms. The council will be focusing on these areas and will be undertaking detailed analysis of these areas, but did not. And there were live offers, and it's a matter of record that there were live offers throughout the process via Mr. Murray, continual efforts at engagement to actually say, what do you need? When are you going to come and talk to us? Didn't happen. And I suppose just, it's a diversion, but it does deal with the Western End issue in terms of the roading network. In my submission, that's not a scope issue. That's a change requested to the roading network within the notified variation. All bets are off. You can ask for whatever you want without notice. The notice is your submission. There's no question that that part of my client's submission is on the variation. The question is the extension area on the variation? It's a different issue.
Yep. And then if we were minded, then it goes into that sort of road, which is in the variation area, so it's definitely open for submission on what the different views of the traffic experts is to the best route is.
Yes, and I would say with regard to the internal roading network, it's not just my client's submission that raises issues about where do the roads go, and the council's position has changed from a very fixed view about where that collector road goes to a much more flexible position. So the panel does have, in my submission, quite a lot of opportunity to locate or put an indicative alignment where it thinks it's best and best achieves all of the objectives of the variation and indeed the relevant objectives of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. I don't know whether you want me to quickly cover Commissioner Munro's homework about the Otago Public Transport Plan. Maybe
in an email or something. I'm just thinking we might adjourn soon for afternoon tea.
Yes.
Addressing
happy to
that
do
in
that.
writing, I think Mr. Munro would be okay with, or?
Absolutely.
Yep.
It's a very discrete point, so I'm happy to do it that way.
Thank you, and thank you for the submissions and the attachment of the Chapman Trip advice and then the cases that they append to that advice too. That's very helpful and interesting, and no doubt the council will give us its version on it in a few weeks' time, and then we'll have to go through it. But thank you for the way that you've stepped it out and given very clearly your client's perspective on the factual basis to apply to the law.
Yes, well, that's my submission, sir, rather than my client's perspective. It just simply relies on a factual record which is difficult to dispute.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we'll adjourn. I realise that there's submitter Mr. Finlan. And sorry, we're running slightly late, but we'll just adjourn for 10 minutes and then come back if that's okay. Just so we can have a freshen and a drink of water. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Winchester.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you as well for bouncing in and out.
No, that's fine, and I wish the panel well, and we will do all we can to assist between now and when the hearing closes.
Thank you. The system's all back on. So, Mr. Finlan, if you'd like to come up to the front, we've read your submission, and I'll just pull it up online as well. And we're over to you for a summary of your submission. Thank you.
There.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Right, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I apologise in advance if my terminology is not technically correct, as this is a process that I'm not particularly familiar with. I've been visiting Queenstown as a holiday destination for nearly 60 years and a resident in Queenstown for 30. And I reside on the Ladies Mile for the last 10 years. I operate in a arboricultural consultancy and contracting business here in the district. I am the property owner at the eastern end of the TPLM, immediately adjacent to the Threatwood development. Queenstown is a spectacular place to reside, and people clearly want to live here. So it is our responsibility to do our best to provide capacity for this to occur. Growth is inevitable, and though it can cause pressure on existing residents and town planning, the positive benefits of growth are huge, providing a rich diversity of people, employment opportunities beyond tourism, improved facilities, hospitals, school, aged care, supermarkets, retail, recreational activities, most of which were not readily available 30 years ago. So I am supportive of the proposed TPLM variation to the district plan. And with regard to my submission, I would like to raise 3 points. Point A, I had raised in my submission and at the pre-hearing discussions matters relating to the amendments detailed in the revised Eastern Boundary Study Plan dating the 27th of September 23. Essentially, the creation of a landscape buffer to the eastern edge of the boundary and adjustments to the Collector Road B. I note that under the TPLM Structural Plan General dating the 21st of November, that these matters, in the most part, have been addressed. Number B, point B, with regard to the open space area as detailed in the TPLM Structural Plan General dating the 21st of the 11th, located towards the northeastern boundary of the property, a reference to the table in section 2, 49.5.15D, the location of these items identified with an asterisk on the structural plan shall be generally consistent with the structural plan. I am in agreement with the proposed open space, size and area. However, I still believe that the location should have sufficient flexibility to allow a developer to integrate the park across the development. I consider this would enable a developer to identify the most suitable location as part of their proposed mix of dwellings in the densities across the HRD and the MDR precincts within the site, and that the best location may only come to light as the development plan evolves. I note that the earlier indicative master plan maps on the Ladies Mile open space areas were expressed as an indicative circle area indicating an approximate location, which I consider to be less prescriptive and provide a higher degree of flexibility as to the final location. And point C is with regard to the staging of the transport infrastructural works along State Highway 6, as detailed in the hearings provision 8th of December, section 29.533, staging of development to integrate with the transport infrastructure, and also page 24, the sub-areas, transport and infrastructural works. I am supportive of the proposed infrastructure and the pattern in which it is evolving through this planning process to date. However, the staging of the development being specifically linked to particular sub-areas is of concern. For convenience, I would refer to Mr. Smith's statement of evidence on behalf of Waka Pūtahi in section 2.5. Noting his recommended changes to the structural plan, highlighting 3 packages of infrastructural works along the Ladies Mile. The transport infrastructural requirements are evenly dispersed over the length of the Ladies Mile, being at the middle and at either end. Package 2, the Stalker Roundabout, currently operation and will require further upgrade. Package 3, Howard's Drive, designed but may need amending due to commercial construction, to commence commercial construction next year. Package 4, the Eastern Roundabout, an important component for the active transport linkages noted on the structural plan, but with no detail, design or commitment from the controlling authority, Waka Pūtahi. Of the 120 hectares within the planning variation land area, there are 3 packages of transport infrastructure that identify with the staging of the development through sub-areas A to I. Sub-areas F and G staged to package 4 have a combined land area of around 11 hectares, 9% of the overall scope of the planning variation area. The balance of the land, 91%, is distributed within areas A to E and J to K, linked to the staging packages 2 and 3. What I am trying to articulate is that potentially 91% of the land can be delivered through the development of packages 2 and 3, whilst sub-areas F and G at 9% of the land area is associated with package 4, the staging of package 4. This appears to be a rather disproportionately small amount of development area for the level of transport infrastructure assigned to these sub-areas F and G when viewed over the collective staging. My concern is there is a risk that Wakakataki may consider package 4 of the transport infrastructure a very low priority, or may not prioritise it at all. This would seriously disrupt the intended major active transport route connectivity with Lake Hayes Estate, State Highway 6, and prevent the delivery of many residences within the sub-areas F and G. I would ask the council planners and you, the commissioners, to give further consideration as to how best to integrate the sub-areas within the staging of the transport infrastructural works. This may be achieved by including the eastern roundabout infrastructure along with the dedicated western bus lane on State Highway 6, which requires the staging of sub-areas A, B, C, E, F and G, as noted at the bottom of the table in section 49.533. The eastern roundabout is fundamentally linked to the major active transport route and the western bus lane on State Highway 6. One cannot function without the other, so there is, in my view, a very logical synergy in combining them. I expect that there may be a better alternative solution, but making no amendments to the current provisions may lead to a less than desirable transport outcomes. Finally, I wish to thank the commissioners, the council staff, the planners, the urban designers, consultants, many of which have been working on this project for over 5 years, and I personally cannot fault their professionalism and their willingness to engage and assist with the multitude of complexities that within this variation process. So I welcome any questions and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Finland. That was very clearly set out. So questions from the panel? Judith, do you?
I have no questions, but thank you for the care that you've gone through in thinking about the transport infrastructure triggers. I think that'll be good for us to consider, and that's very helpful. Thank you.
I have no questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Gillian?
I'll just echo Judith's comments. It's very well set out, and I appreciate that, but I have no questions.
Thank you.
Just over a bit.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't have any either. You've just with the open space area, you've realised that the change with the asterisks and the generally consistent with.
Yes.
So there is an element of flexibility, but just so I'm clear, you're reading or requesting greater flexibility than generally consistent with that area.
Yes, I am, to flexibility of a few metre shift either way. I'm looking at the opportunity to be able to to provide the developer the option to locate it, as I say, a same size, but just where it may land in relation to as they evolve the development of the site would be somewhat less prescriptive in locating it at the moment in its northeastern corner.
I suspect as you go through the process, some some minor movements, etc., will be accommodated. If you were to move it to the back left corner or the front left corner or something, there may be other discussions.
Thank you. Yeah.
But yes, it was just picking up that sort of sufficient flexibility.
Okay, thanks.
But thank you very much for your submission, and we will carefully, as has been alluded to, consider it. And it is very clear. So thank you for taking the time to come in out of your day, and also thank you for the comments in terms of the way that you found the process to have gone to date.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll adjourn and just take a 10-minute break before we have Mr. Robinson. Is lovely. Thank you. Is that okay, Mr. Robinson? We will just take a quick break now. Thank you. Robinson Thank you, Mr. Robinson, with my mic on this time. In terms of, you asked about timing, we've got 2 other submitters this afternoon as well. So we've got circa 15, maybe 20 minutes at the most.
I'll keep it as short and sweet as possible.
Yes, it also just means it helps us if you focus on the key points.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we can get just an information overload. So that would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak and put forward a few ideas. I must admit, I've just started a new job in the last few weeks, and I haven't had a moment to spare, and so I've just frantically put together a few ideas and tried to condense things down a bit.
Thank you.
But so my name is Jim Robinson. I'm a resident of Lake Hayes Estate, where I've lived for 16 years, and I'm a former business owner in the service and retail industry, and I'm fairly recently a former tour guide and driver. And so my submission focuses on the current and future highway infrastructure. So it's all about traffic and the effects this traffic, which I believe will be worsened by the development and the implementation of the Te Pūtahi Ladies Mile Variation Plan. One of my concerns is the expectation that residents of the proposed 2,400 additional homes, if it is that many, together with the current residents of Lake Hayes Estate and Shotover Country, that they will walk, cycle and use the new public transport system. I believe that expecting an extreme modal shift, as it's described, is totally naive. And State Highway 6 is referred to by some as the gateway to Queenstown. I'm told 90% of visitors to Queenstown either arrive by road from Christchurch in a rental car or a motorhome, or fly in and then hire a vehicle here. Driving our spectacular South Island roads is widely considered part of the must-do visitor experience. I believe without a major highway infrastructure upgrade, Ladies Mile will be known as the bottleneck of Queenstown, and further traffic congestion will be detrimental to attracting more visitors to the area. I've discussed options for highway infrastructure upgrades with engineers from Whakakotahi and Dunedin, and I'm well aware that any options detailed further on will take significant planning and funding. I'm not a traffic engineer. My discipline is industrial instrumentation and control. I've also been involved in product development in medical and agri-tech industries. And I've, up until May 2021, spent 14 years as a business owner in the pool and spa industry. Having a showroom and service base in Glenda Drive and being a resident of Lake Hayes Estate, I made the trip across the Shotover Bridge every morning and evening. From time to time during a pool installation project, there would be at least 12 daily trips across the Shotover Bridge by our staff or trucking contractors transporting backfill and materials for a pool project. We also had a small, a small fleet of 6 commercial vehicles servicing hotels, holiday homes and domestic pool owners, with a territory covering the CBD, Kelvin Heights, Jacks Point, Dalefield and Arrowtown. Weekly, we had technicians making a trip across to Kingston, Glenorchy, Wanaka and Cromwell. An estimated 50% of our trips were made from Frankton across the Shotover Bridge and were held up from time to time with traffic delays and bottlenecks. More recently, after selling the pool business, I've worked, as I mentioned, as a luxury tour guide and driver. Typically, this involved transfers between the airport and hotels or lodges such as Matakauri and Blanket Bay towards Glenorchy. I often did pickups from guests' accommodation for sightseeing or wine tasting tours to the Gibbston Valley, Bannockburn, Wanaka, or transfers further afield to the Lindis Valley Lodge or Aoraki Mount Cook. And on a daily basis, I experience the same traffic woes over the Shotover Bridge we currently face as commuters, and for that matter, the gridlock we see in the CBD at the moment as we attempted to get our clients to Glenorchy. Just some comments on public transport. And firstly, the Frankton bus hub regarding the Highway 6A and Highway 6 intersection upgrade at Frankton. I believe it's a fantastic idea, especially focusing on Highway 6A from Frankton into the CBD. This should substantially reduce the amount of tourist traffic with visitors based in town who currently feel the need to have a rental car to get around. There needs to be a fast, reliable transport service interconnecting the CBD, Frankton hub, the airport, and the 5-mile Queenstown Central shopping precinct, including the Remarkables Park shopping area and hotel precinct. Only then would visitors and residents contemplate ditching their cars. There of course needs to be frequent links from the Frankton hub and Frankton shopping areas servicing the existing suburbs north of Shotover Bridge, including Lake Hayes Estate, Shotover Country and Ladies Mile. However, because of our low population density and mix of destinations within a rural environment, having a public transport system that makes frequent connections to the various parts of the region may never be totally achievable. As a real-time example that I came across yesterday, visitors staying in the CBD may want to shop at Queenstown Central and then head off to Jack's Point for a game of golf, followed by lunch at Gibbston Valley, and then in the afternoon head to Arrowtown for a walk around the galleries and perhaps have an evening meal at Ammersfield.
That sounds like a nicer day than we had.
Me too. There's multiple bus connections that just don't connect effectively, with the only practical choices being travelling via car or the engagement of a personal driver like myself. So what about existing Lake Hayes Shotover Country residents? What stops them from making the mode shift to public transport? If you monitor the current traffic feeding to and from Lake Hayes Estate, Shotover Country, Arrowtown, further afield to Cromwell and Wanaka, there are many trade and service-related vehicles whose drivers cannot use bikes or public transport if they have to carry out their jobs. The percentage, I estimate, between 35 to 45% of the vehicles that I see coming out of Lake Hayes Estate. Many other residents require the flexibility of being able to pick up the kids after school, taking them to soccer practice or music lessons, whatever. The remainder of commuters are from out of town. They would need fast, frequent, reliable, inter-regional public transport options that we see in larger cities that have access to rail. You have to ask, why are these people commuting 50 or 60 kilometres from out of town in the first place? Perhaps because of the lack of affordable housing in the Queenstown area. Is the new Ladies Mile housing going to be affordable, or is it going to be similar to the affordable housing we see in Hanley's Farm? It's unlikely to be any different. Some out-of-town commuters may prefer the Cromwell or Wanaka lifestyle, but either way, Queenstown and Frankton is where most of the jobs are. I've mentioned a significant State Highway 6 upgrade. From my experience as a business owner in the pool service industry and later as a guide and driver, spending a great deal of time on our roads, I believe a major highway upgrade is long overdue and must be completed before we contemplate further housing intensification in Ladies Mile. To coin a phrase, another major residential development would be the straw that breaks the camel's back. I agree with the points put forward by the Lake Hayes and Shotover Community Association. I would go further to suggest that there is an urgent need to upgrade the current State Highway 6 infrastructure, as this section of the highway is already at or beyond capacity. As mentioned in their submission, in the morning, State Highway 6 is severely congested around Howards Drive and the Stalker Road roundabout, at times to the point of gridlock. This is caused by the sheer volume of vehicles converging in one area. We already have traffic on the highway originating from Arrowtown and Gibbston, plus traffic from Wanaka and Cromwell. And then the local Ladies Mile traffic merges from Lake Hayes Estate, Shotover Country and Dalefield via Lower Shotover Road, all feeding onto a single lane towards Frankton, attempting to cross the Shotover Bridge. Excuse me. In the afternoons, the gridlock moves to the Hawthorne Drive intersection of State Highway 6 at Frankton, somewhere between 3:30 and 6 p.m. We see northbound vehicles originating from Jacks Point, Hanleys and further south, maybe on their way up from Invercargill, merging with traffic from the CBD at the BP roundabout. While some vehicles will head left towards the CBD, the remainder will turn right, heading north on State Highway 6. A few hundred metres further on, we see the introduction of a second lane, which could have been brilliant. But these two lanes of northbound traffic then merge with traffic from Hawthorne Drive at the roundabout, a third source of commuter traffic, and that combines commuters from Glenda Drive, Remarkables Park, 5 Mile, shopping precincts. And there's some school traffic, obviously, earlier on. These three lanes of traffic essentially merging into one single lane highway, the major bottleneck north as it crosses the Shotover Bridge. From personal experience, a 7-minute off-peak journey from Glenda Drive can at times take nearly an hour. With the proposed addition of 2,400 new homes at Ladies Mile, assuming an average of only 2 vehicles per household, we could expect to see an additional 4,800 commuters. In truth, I believe we can expect double this volume, going by the average number of cars per household in Lake Hayes Estate and Shotover Country. But hold on, the experts say we are going to encourage all the new residents to abandon their cars in favour of cycling and public transport. Even if all the new residents at Ladies Mile use buses on their daily commute, assuming only 4,800 commuters, we'll see somewhere around 160 buses, assuming 30 people per bus, feeding onto this already gridlocked highway between 8 and 9 a.m. And the same scenario for the evening snarl-up, an even worse scenario.
Mr. Robinson, we have read your submission.
Yeah.
Just given timing and potential questions.
I've probably got about
you've got
5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's your time, so
Yeah,
up
excellent.
to you how you use it. 5 minutes is fine.
Okay. Just one little thing I would mention, it was one of the experts said that it takes 10 minutes to cycle between some arbitrary place in the Ladies Mile development over the Shotover Bridge to Frankton. Well, it takes me on a bike, and I'm not that sloth, 35 to 40 minutes to go from our place to the event centre. And so in a car, at 80 kilometres an hour on a Sunday morning when there is no traffic, it takes about 8 minutes. So he must have been going really, really fast when he came to that conclusion. I just want to say, I know it's sort of diverting from the whole thing, what you guys are about, but I think a broader approach is needed to just sort of sit down and think about the whole picture. So I believe we need a two-pronged approach. We need fast, efficient public transport while also increasing the capacity of the highway. And I know the latter goes against all principles of reducing our reliance on cars for the sake of the environment, but it would take an amazing bus network to encourage the majority to leave their cars at home. Are we expecting the builders, the electricians and plumbers to use buses? I would think not. And we're going to get more of them as being the residents of the Ladies Mile development. We're now seeing more direct flights from the US into Christchurch. A new one was in the media this week. Queenstown's tourist numbers are expected to grow by 30% in the next 10 years. Part of the visitor experience is to be able to self-drive after flying into Queenstown or to make the journey by road from Christchurch. The majority of these visitors will travel on the single-lane Highway 6 through Ladies Mile. And to allow for the inevitable growth in traffic volumes and build some resilience into the main arterial route, I believe we must plan to make Highway 6 either a dual carriageway in either direction or plan an alternative Highway 6 bypass route. And in my submission, I did do some, I had some plans, and just to sort of summarise it very, very quickly, one option was a second bridge crossing near the north end of the northwestern runway extension at Hawthorne Drive, spanning across the Shotover River gravel flats, running close to the Twin Rivers Trail through the undeveloped Department of Conservation and QLDC land, and that would link Shotover Country and Lake Hayes Estate. It would continue through to State Highway 6, perhaps via Alex Robbins Road, with an intersection or roundabout just before the Lake Hayes Pavilion. There's private land and so forth that it'd have to go through. There's a lot of challenges to deal with. This other option, I'll just go through very, very quickly. Option 2, which is a Highway 6 Southern Link bypass. This has actually been explored by the Porter Group, I believe, and they got some of their people to use it as a sort of a test project. And while it would be a significant and costly piece of engineering, a bridge upgrade, an alternative route, I think is well overdue. And this bypass would start just basically at the south near the remarkable ski field turn-off where the highway veers towards the Falls Bridge. It would follow Boyd Road, the Kawerau Falls Road, and then continue along the rural private road at the base of the Remarkables Range on the southern side of the Kawerau River. And a short intermediate feeder bridge could link across to the Remarkables Park area between the high school and the northwestern runway extension, providing a connection to the Remarkables Park retail and hotel precinct, the high school, Queenstown Airport. The highway bypass road would continue on the south side of the river through current rural land, and then another link across to the Lake Hayes Estate, Shotover area and Ladies Mile. And then a further link could also go through Robbins Road, or it could continue 4 kilometres through rural land and come through across the Kawerau River over the existing to the existing Arrow Junction turn-off or intersection via Morven Ferry Road. I'm sure this plan has been thought about by people. It just makes so much sense. It's just, it requires money, but it is a great way of future-proofing our access to the area, and it just takes all the pressure from that main arterial. So I'll just say in summary, we've already seen new residential apartments in Frankton in the 5 Mile precinct with more construction to start next year. This to me makes perfect sense, being on the doorstep to all retail centres, restaurants, business hubs, the existing high school, the airport and the transport hub. This is the place for intensive multi-storey development, not Ladies Mile. And let's get our highway infrastructure sorted before contemplating adding to the existing traffic chaos. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Robinson?
I don't have any questions, but I think I understand your position quite clearly. Thank you.
Excellent.
No questions for me.
Gillian? Ian?
Okay.
Just one from me was being a resident at the Lake Hayes Estate, and you mentioned number of cars per household. what would you consider to be the sort of average number of cars per household within Lake Hayes and Shotover country as well?
We have 5. Next door neighbour is a rental property. There would be 6 or 7. At some places, a bigger home, there are fairly large homes there, some with 4 or 5 bedrooms. They could have 5 or 6 cars. I would say a safe average of 4 cars per household. Given that we're talking about medium density development, 800 to 900 square metre homes, maybe 4 bedrooms on average.
That aligns with the 4 of someone else that we've heard from. So thank you. That's good to know in terms of just the numbers, etc.
Absolutely.
The other thing you mentioned is the school bus. And you said in your submission, I'm not sure if you read that part out, but about your son, the school bus, insufficient capacity, etc.
Yes. Yes.
So is your son older or?
He's year 12, so he's got 1 year to go. So
does he drive himself to school now? Or?
He will. He's got a car. He's doing his provisional licence, but he does prefer where he can to use public transport. But often he's frustrated because he can't get. He'll sometimes miss the bus from school because of where the classroom is located, and. Which is very frustrating, and he may also want to travel to the other side of the airport to the event centre where he might do rock climbing or whatever. So he's forced to wait a long period of time. He'll walk to the existing Frankton hub. He's fairly close to the event centre, so it may be 45 minutes to an hour. You know, there are no real connecting services to make that viable. That will happen in the future, I'm sure, but at the moment it's very frustrating.
And just one question of whether you're aware of the idea of bus lanes being added along State Highway 6. What's your view on those?
Yeah, well, fantastic.
From the comments.
And I mean, the picture's been up on the screen most of the time, those sections in red. The sections in red need to cross the bridge. It needs to be part of the bridge as well to make it work, because it's going to create the bottleneck of all bottlenecks. It'd be amazing.
Do you think the bottlenecks at the bridge or at the roundabouts, etc., either side, whether you're heading into town or out of town in the peak?
Yeah.
Which one do you think is the bottleneck creation? The bridge itself, or actually back at the roundabouts?
I think certainly heading east in the afternoon or in the evening, which I'm doing currently. Yeah, I'm very aware of 3 streams of traffic all merging into one, and there's a lot of traffic. So it would be moving at a slower pace, even with a bridge with 4 lanes to in either direction.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I've got no further questions. We've read your submission. We've listened to what you've said, and transport is an issue that we have addressed extensively over the hearing and during the hearing, with including this morning a good probably hour with 2 traffic engineers.
I bet.
So we're very aware of the issues, and we're very, very mindful of the potential effects, and also the importance of, if this variation is to be improved, of making sure that it's a success in the long run. So thank you very much for your submission. Thank you too for taking time off work, especially with a new job, etc.
It was quite a juggling act to do that, and I felt I needed to, represent a lot of the people in our area who are either too busy or their attitude is, well, I'll just move somewhere else. And to be quite honest, if it becomes as bad as I think it will be, if this goes ahead, we'll move to Christchurch. you know, and we'll forego all the marvellous things this area has to offer. But traffic, I think, is our biggest issue.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Now, our next submitter is Mr. Blakely. So just once Mr. Robinson's gone, there's no hurry. Please set yourself up and we can, we've read your submission. We've read your statement of evidence. So in terms of timing, you don't need to read everything fully, but it's more useful for us if you hit the highlights, and then we can engage longer with questions.
Right.
But we're in your hands as to how you'd rather do it.
Well, I can do that. I hadn't planned to. I was just assumed it was taken as read.
It is. That's perfect.
But
Thank you.
I can touch on the key themes, which I'm sure you are very familiar with all of them by now. If I could just say to begin with that, and I'm sure again you will have heard it, but just how difficult this process has been. I mean, I'm familiar with the process, but for a layperson, it's just overwhelming, and the amount of information, and I think a lot of submitters and other people with, and I hear a lot of people that didn't submit, but just it was just too much and too difficult. They didn't get involved, and so I think I'm concerned that you're not hearing from a lot of people that have similar concerns to what I have. So I've lived in the area since 1985, so I've witnessed a huge amount of change in that time. But I really worry that the Ladies' Mile variation goes too far, and it loses what I think is the essence of Queenstown. And as I've said in my evidence, that I think one of the key differences for Queenstown, the Wakatipu Basin, is that rural character, sets it apart from other tourist destinations around the world, and we can't lose that. And this location is just right on the entrance to Queenstown, and a key location. Seems to me it's just kind of been the logical next step because of infrastructure being close at hand. So it leapfrogs along Ladies' Mile. I mean, I was here during the lead up to the operative plan and went to public hearings, and at that time the Shotover River was the urban growth boundary, and then subsequent to that they let go the Lake Hayes estate, and once they did that, that opened the floodgates. But I still think that the Ladies' Mile is a really important area, and I've also mentioned about the significance to the history of the area, and also of the very good quality soils that it has, and I understand that that can't be taken into account, even though it is classified as high quality soils. But it is interesting to consider that, with that MPS in place, and if this variation was put forward now, that it probably wouldn't proceed. So just allow me to open this up. So rural character is a key one for me, and my overall theme, if you like, is that I believe that it should be turned down in its current form. and that the effects on landscape, rural character and the main entrance to Queenstown and the basin are key concerns. The next one is traffic and infrastructure. I won't say anything more about that. I'm sure you've heard it all. If the variation in some form is to proceed, I'm very concerned about the high density residential and that kind of development, which seems to me completely at odds with Queenstown, especially at the entrance to the town. And it kind of feels to me like it's just Auckland planners and urban designers have kind of do what they do up there and bring it, transpose it down into the Queenstown area, which I think is inappropriate. There's the lack of recognition of the agricultural and pastoral history of the Ladies' Mile, which I've touched on. I think that's been picked up a little bit more as more in the landscape evidence as it came through, but I just feel that European pastoral character and where it's come from has not been taken into account. I worry that when it comes down to such things as heritage vegetation, that with the bus lanes and cycleways and what have you, that the hedgerows will have to go, and I've always regarded those as historic features, and they were in the district plan as historic features, but now seem to have been removed, plus other vegetation. So that's a sort of a more minor issue. I'll touch on the Threepwood subdivision at the eastern end of Ladies' Mile, which I believe was a very successful outcome in terms of integrating residential development into the rural environment, where it's set back against the slope and there's generous open space and ruralness next to the highway. So I just put that there as a model of what I regard as a good landscape outcome. So just touching again on the changes that if the variation is to proceed, I do support a comprehensive planning approach. And at the very least, I'd like to see a building height limit of 12 metres, which I think could be absorbed along there. And I'd also like to see a 75 metre setback on State Highway 6 to retain a decent level of openness and setback. I don't believe 25 metres with a bus lane and cycle lane is anywhere near enough, and it's just going to make it like an urban, a really full-on urban development, which I wouldn't want to see. So I think I'll leave it at that. My messages I hope, are clear in my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Judith, you need...
Oh, sorry, this is one other point
yes.
I'd just like to make. It's not in my evidence, but it feels like, to a lay person and a resident that this is like a juggernaut that you can't stop or influence. That's the feeling that we have, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of people. Thank you.
It's certainly a juggernaut. but equally it's a very complex location and it's a very important plan change. So the two go hand in hand, unfortunately, and you'll be used to that with your role at APAG in terms of maybe not at this scale of subdivision, but with development, etc., like that.
Sure.
To the degree it definitely may be declined, it may be approved with and accepted with changes, and to the degree you've got time or the willingness or the inclination at all, do feel free to watch the live stream that's all recorded, and you can see the challenges, the questions put to the council, etc., and how things have developed and evolved through the process. So certainly understand you're, to my mind, a little bit more familiar with the processes, given, I assume, your APAG type role.
Yes.
But for anyone who's not familiar with large development, it is a lot of material. And that reflects the nature of the beast to a degree.
I do understand that, but I guess my point is that it's just overwhelming for the average person, and a lot of people have just fallen by the wayside.
It's, yes, fully accept that. It's a lot of material for us. Look at some of the paper I've got beside, and I'm trying to use my laptop now to reduce paper.
No, I can fully understand that.
Yeah, thank you. Now,
sympathise.
Judith, any questions?
Good afternoon, Mr. Blakely. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate you taking a pragmatic view and suggesting some changes that you would like to see should the variation go ahead, and it is still a question. It is not a done deal either way. So I'm quite interested in paragraphs 20 and 21 of your lay evidence that you submitted in advance. Have you got that?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So you've obviously been keeping abreast of this to a degree.
To a degree.
And we've been having quite a lot of conversations with urban designers and transport experts about Ladies Mile, the road, State Highway 6, if the variation were to be approved. And there's been quite a lot of change over the course of the hearing. And one of the ideas that's been explored is about reducing the setbacks on both sides of State Highway 6, reducing the speed limit on State Highway 6 from 80 to 60, which allows traffic signals to go in at Howards Drive and Stalker Road instead of the roundabouts. And that also means that you can get at-grade pedestrian crossings to link Lake Hayes and Shotover country to the new commercial zone and the schools that are envisaged by the variation. With that in mind, or knowing that, does that change your view on what the setback should be on the north side of Ladies Mile in particular, in relation to that 75 metres that you originally suggested?
Not really, because it's more, in my mind, it's more to do with openness and making it less urbanised. So if there's to be significant urban development on the northern side, that I think there needs to be a really generous buffer zone. 25 metres to my mind is not enough.
Okay. So if it were to be approved and we have a supermarket and the schools, would those facilities, in your view, be of benefit to residents of Lake Hayes and Shotover country?
Yes, I think they probably would, and it would definitely help to reduce traffic if there could be a school and supermarket in that if there is to be urban development in that area, then that would be a positive thing to have local facilities in neighbourhood areas. So I do support that.
Okay. So from a road safety perspective, people crossing the road at grade at 80 kilometres an hour isn't hugely safe.
No.
And originally an underpass was proposed. Would that be, in your view, a better outcome?
An underpass?
Yeah. So you can link the Lake Hayes Shotover
Well,
Country
it needs to
community
be, I
with the...
have, yeah, I'm not quite sure what the best option would be in terms of linking it, but I certainly think that linking is a good option.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's all, you know, if it's to go ahead, then the whole of the, that part of, from Lake Hayes to the Shotover is really one interconnected area. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Blakely.
Wani?
No questions, thanks.
Thank you. Julian? Ian?
Also, no questions, but thank you tremendously for particularly the depth that you went to in your written statement to us.
Thank you.
Just from me, you driving in, I take it you live in Arrowtown.
I live in Arrowtown.
And so you drive in, probably drove in today, etc.
Yes, I did.
The rural environment and the sort of openness, when you're driving in, is that more an openness towards the Remarkables or an openness towards Slope Hill, just given, and I'm not a local, but when we've been there, there's rows of trees along the northern side of State Highway 6, which tends to obscure views at present.
It does. It's all of that, really, I suppose. It's just that feeling of, at the moment, it doesn't feel urbanised when you're driving along. It's got more urbanised. I would, you know, I have witnessed that over 20 odd years, but it still has a rural character, and so you still get glimpses of rural character even on the north side, and views to the ONF across it. And yeah, and I also, as I mentioned before, that I can see that vegetation that's there that you referred to, a lot of that's probably going to have to be removed. I can't see how that can stay if the road is to be upgraded and if there is to be a bus lane, as the master plan shows. I mean, that sort of detail is not shown in the master plan, but needs to be thought through. And so that's going to open up those views a lot more if that hedgerow particularly is removed, which screens a lot of it at the moment. But it's all part of, you know, that's one of the points I was making, that vegetation, those hedgerows, the planting is all part of the sort of the heritage landscape that was there, based on with Threepwood and Glen Panel, and the agricultural history that's happened there because of the quality of the soils, and it's something that's going to be lost.
And you were asked about linkages with like community facilities, etc. Should it go ahead for Shotover Country Lake Hayes? If there was a large offering supermarket there, etc., sports grounds, a secondary school, for Arrowtown, that would become a potential. Can you see yourself visiting that, or would you drive your child across Shotover River and off to Wakatipu High and things like that for the people in Arrowtown? Can you see it being a potential community facility?
Yes, I can. I think if it's closer, it would definitely be attractive to Arrowtown and surrounds. Yes, I do.
And you've discussed the traffic with Judith, and the rest of your submission's all clear and very to the point.
Good.
So thank you again for your submission and also for the evidence and taking the time to do that, because as you say, a lot of people, it's too much. So, and we heard that from Mr. Robinson as well, wanting to be here to represent a voice that for many people, the they've got other things to do.
Well, that's
and
right.
there's too
Everybody's
much.
busy, and it's just too much. Yeah.
So thank you very much for the time and taking the time out of your day.
Right. Thank you.
Have a lovely evening.
Good luck with the task ahead. I don't envy you.
Thank you. Now, our final submitter for today is Ms. Crick. So, Ms. Crick, the floor is yours. Again, we do have your submission, and it's up to you how you use the time, but we have it, we've read it, and we're in your hands as to how you would like to proceed. And just take your time getting ready. You've just turned it off, I think.
Turned them.
Get
no
some
light.
water and things.
There's no light.
Take your time.
Yeah, I'll just have to use some glasses. All right. I guess first of all I'd like to reinforce what the previous two submitters have said especially regarding the openness, the historic nature of the rural landscape that's there. I think that and what Mr. Robertson was saying regarding the issues that it will drive people out of town if the development does go ahead in this form. I am a layperson, as I've obviously said in my original submission, and have owned a home in central Queenstown for 30 years. I've witnessed huge change over time, but my ongoing concern from the beginning is the QLD's lack of appreciation of aesthetics for this town and its apparent willingness to sell out to the developers. Now, the next section, I think I've already mentioned it in the submission, how I went to a workshop and it was really all about a developer and how following that time, those years in the 90s, early 2000s, the apartments were just built across Queenstown Hill with no concern for local homes. Now, I may, being obviously a lay submitter, I should probably come up with things that are ignorant as far as regulations are concerned. I haven't read the updates. Actually, I haven't read a lot, really, because, again, it's so much. Hopefully over Christmas we'll have time to, to study it a bit more.
That would be very positive, and I'm not sure many people will be reading all of that over Christmas. So I'm very pleased to hear someone reading, so that's lovely.
Right. Well, rightly or wrongly, I have no faith in council to provide guidelines or make it a condition for consent for developments regarding the level of quality and design. And if they did, I don't believe they would enforce any conditions. As I say, I've seen it before. And now, up to the present day, I look at the recent development of units in Gorge Road on the old school land, where now the initial newly built set of units has been completed, and it's distressing to see that they just arrive out of the footpath. There is absolutely no setback. For people to put their key in the lock, a tenant has to stand on the footpath with others passing by, and it's dangerous and it's ugly. There's nothing that they can do to make that place attractive with some pots or anything else. So I just think that this current development demonstrates a lack of any aesthetics or provisions for a quality of life for people living there. The rest of the land is empty, so there are numerous units obviously that are still going to be built. But heaven forbid what they're going to look like. If the first lot is jammed in against the footpath, what are they going to do with the rest of them? Queenstown originally tried to keep the buildings at least on a shared colour palette, but again, this was not enforced. I'm not sure whether I mentioned this part in the original one. With the recent developments of the wider Frankton shopping area, look, it could have been architecturally fabulous, so much more attractive with buildings constructed all of local materials to a similar, consistent design palette. For example, the Cotswold Village in England is a major tourist attraction due to their buildings alone. Look what the rest we have. All built in the Cotswold stone to a heritage architectural design. It was so disappointing when all these hickledy-pickledy places went up with various angles, materials, heights, colours, signage, just going in all directions. Sure, some buildings are better than others, but if there was a consistency, it's so much more pleasant to the eye and, the sense of feeling that you get when you're there. Council's argument for affordable housing. History has already shown that there will be negative impacts with poor design of low quality and the use of inferior building materials. One such example is the Oaks, the consequence of which ratepayers are currently wearing and will continue to wear into the distant future. Citing affordable housing and building homes for families here is just an empty claim to push this variation through. Of course we want to see homes provided for people, but we want homes. We don't want a ghetto, which this will surely be. There is no such thing as affordable housing. Lake Hayes Estate was meant to be for affordable housing, but of course, as everyone knows, this has not been the outcome. Building costs are exponentially high, the land and development costs are high, with high interest rates. Developers' aim is to make money, not provide affordable housing. It may do so by providing low quality, and which provides in turn a low quality of life. Who can we rely on to protect the community from these low quality developments? Our council surely, but it certainly isn't. We're vulnerable as a community with this variation aggressively sought by our own council. The target market. Who actually is the target market for up to 8,000 to 10,000 people that this development is being built for? One claim is that these units are being built for family, but this ghetto of intensification will not provide a quality of life for them. In fact, it could be considered an insult to families that council thinks it appropriate and desirable to jam them into 6-storey apartment blocks with one car park. And the patriarchy at council can say how wonderful they are for providing homes for families. Well, maybe the families don't actually want to live there. Queenstown is an expensive place to live, and you would have to ask, is it fair or appropriate for low-income families? The families who the council ardently profess to be providing homes for are for the most part not in this market, and who believe that 6-storey apartment blocks squeezed together with one parking space will be good. Who thinks that that will be good for families? To cut costs in these kind of builds, there's no storage provided, the walls will be paper thin. It's happening in most new builds for rentals. With this intensification, there will be a major issue with rubbish and people's belongings. Transient workers will accumulate rubbish. What are they going to do with it if this is such an intense development as it's laid out? Again, who is going to manage the mess this development will create? Again, probably us as the ratepayers who are saying, please don't do this. It has not been thought through. There are other alternatives. I mean, 6 stories high, I know there's a variation, but how is it going to be managed? Are the body corps? I just don't see how this intensification is managed in such an area. Research has also shown that these types of development, the drug industry, which is here in the underbelly of Queenstown, is more likely to flourish in this kind of environment. The real estate agents will tell you the young couples, this demographic group, is moving to locations such as Cromwell, where they can live and grow a family in a standalone home. They don't want an apartment in a densely populated, high-rise apartment block in a tourist town with all the attendant problems. The apartment market has slowed. Economists are saying the same thing. Just TV News 9 December, economists from CBRE quoted a 15% drop in apartment sales in Wellington. The Gibbston Valley development has been halted due to lack of interest and economic viability. Would holiday makers here for a couple of days really want to spend their time gridlocked in traffic? They could catch a bus, it's claimed, drive in the fast lane, arrive in Frankton, and then where would they go? Workers who may have to travel to Queenstown itself for hospitality or the service industry will have to take time to if they took the bus, they're still going to get into the bottleneck and go in the slow lane like everybody else going to Queenstown, and I know that's been mentioned, so I'll keep going. again, it's the claim of the transport to commercial industries and other activities. It's all over the place. It's not, there's small businesses in Lake Hayes Estate, there's businesses in Fernhill, there's children's classes, there's different, all the different tradies are going in every which way. It's like, it reads like it's all going to be, magic, that, there's going to be one car park. It just reminds me of the Emperor's New Clothes. There seem to be two realities operating here. One, the council, and the other, the actual reality of the people who live there and work there. Regarding the report 42A, analysis of submissions, page 67, clause 11, the planner breaks down the submissions into 14 themes. Aside from using a couple of the themes as example, I just wished, other experts have dealt with all that, I'm sure, I wish to simply make the overall observation about the attitudes expressed within this report. I'm compelled to say I found the whole section so completely disrespectful to the community of submitters who care so much about this area. Every submission theme without fail is counteracted, often in quite derogatory terms. At the conclusion of each set of submissions is the planner's rebuttal, just became a mantra. To quote, I therefore disagree with the submission that I do not consider the submission's concerns valid. I do not consider this a valid reason for the council to shift direction. Under subclause A, submitters are called out as being selfish for wanting to slow growth. They're accused of wanting to restrict others from having the district lifestyle. Never mind the actual reality that with an addition of 8 to 10,000 cars, no one will be able to travel anywhere except at snail's pace. No water, low-lying Lake Hayes will be polluted, the Shotover Bridge will have collapsed, as it was deemed by QLDC to be at capacity by 2023. I don't need to read you the quote, obviously. What's changed? I believe there's some update on the bridge, but it may be wise to remember history does repeat itself. Again, such as the collapse of the CTV building in the Christchurch earthquake, where over 100 people were killed due to faulty sign-offs. Included in the submissions are suggestions by locals of suitable places for development, naming areas that are designated for development. But in the report, they're all basically rubbished by the planner acting for council. I know from independent planners of development waiting to get consent, going to the council, but the council doesn't want to know. They appear fixated on fighting for this development. One has to ask the question, why? Why is the council taking this action? It is usual for the developers to be going through this process. Why are we as ratepayers funding this when the majority are against it? Why is the council supporting a developer who has purchased this land already and who is the same developer who has left council and consequently us, the ratepayers, paying for the leaky apartment development? I don't understand. The community is wanting to be involved, but some feel they are so tired of facing a brick wall. I know some have expressed concern about backlash that they may get. I note under 11.7 that the relevant Act and its provisions are included by the planner. These provisions all direct the council to manage growth, among other things, providing for well-functioning urban environments, closely monitoring growth, ensuring a forward supply of housing, and ensuring a competitive housing market. Isn't this what the community is putting forward? The traffic situation will not provide for a well-functioning urban environment. Concerns are expressed about the infrastructure. They are asking for growth to be monitored. Other subdivisions have been put forward. They are concerned about the housing situation being properly monitored. For example, there is a dire need for worker accommodation currently. Many of the workers are in the construction industry. But when those projects are completed, those workers will be gone. Foresight and monitoring does need to occur. And lastly, they have to provide a competitive housing market, which means do not provide an oversupply of houses. How much research into the effects of this type of intensive property development and subsequent marketing research has the council actually done? Are we going to be left with a white elephant? The Labor government regulations around housing rentals force many landlords out of the market. Holiday homes were once rented, but regulations were such that tenants could not be moved and there were difficulties for landlords. The government has now changed, and with it, the new regulations will enable those homes to be utilised again. I note in 11.7 it states there is no mechanism for council to slow growth. But as I understand it, the new government is allowing councils to manage growth. So if the community wants a considered overall plan for the Wakatipu Basin, then regionally there should be control. Behavioural change. The biggest misnomer claimed is that people's behaviour is going to change. We live in a village, yet for 4 or more hours a day, the traffic is already gridlocked as far away as Amersfield and the Arrowtown turn-off. Somehow, another 8 to 10,000 are going to reside in this area. To make the issue of the traffic situation disappear, the claim is made that they, some miracle workers, will bring about the change in people's behaviour, which we all know from experience doesn't happen. It is claimed 2 tactics will achieve this. Number 1, public transport is going to solve this problem. A fast-track bus lane is to be implemented, which will zoom down a short stretch of the road to Frankton, hit the bottleneck, and the Shotover Bridge, and be in the slow lane like everybody else. Second tactic, only 1 car park will be provided per unit. Historically, the community does not use public transport, and it's not actually feasible. Everyone knows local transport schemes consistently fail, no matter how cheap the ride is, and the ratepayer pays the bill. Of the community groups who live and work here, many are service providers, etc. A fast-track bus will only work if it is picking up 1 group to take to 1 place of work. Activities in the basin are located every which way. Tradies won't be taking their tools on the bus, and it won't suit school classes, etc. The plan to limit car parks to force people to have 1 car is highly unrealistic. Can you imagine what it will be like in this intense, what I call ghetto? Cars will inevitably end up parked on the footpath, on open land, in other people's car park, on the children's playground, wherever it can be squeezed in. If there are 3 workers in a unit, 3 cars will be not only required but will be parked there, regardless of the rule of 1 car park. Queenstown operates 24 hours a day. People work shift work. Queenstown industry is a tourism. Many workers are transient in the town and want to enjoy other activities. And it's a fantasy. It's, again, a back to the emperor's new clothes. It's not going to work. My daughter and I have owned a townhouse near Frankton for 20 years. It has 5 bedrooms, and guess how many cars have always been parked outside? 5. So it was good to hear Mr. Robinson talk about the 4 cars per house there. I mean, and who's going to monitor it? Who's going to monitor the residents' 1 car park? I would hazard a guess, absolutely no one. The council will do nothing, and the developers will be long gone. I'll miss out further traffic. If people who oppose the plan change due to the significant direct effect on their everyday lives, if these people are not listened to, there will be a downstream effect of frustration, a sense of futility, which may cause many of our desperately needed workers, especially tradespeople, to leave the area, creating a disconnected, destabilised population, lacking the lifeblood of a community, the very reason we're all drawn to this area for us many years ago. I understand Lake Hayes Estate is a good place to live for families, but across the road, if this planned ghetto is built, the negative effect on these families must be considered. The plea is to please listen to this community. We need them. They are our stable workforce, not the transients. It's not a healthy development for this area. It must be recognised Queenstown is in a realm of its own compared to the rest of the country. Our tourist dollar very much depends on it. We've got climate change and landfill issues are big now. Again, I don't know whether that's in the document. You know, where is the consideration for landfill management and climate change? I mean, we've got that smelly Oxbow that we all drive past. not exactly clean and green. Lip service only is paid to the effects of such development on landfill and climate change. Can you imagine the pollution that will be caused with 20,000 or at least 10 idling cars on a road of a few kilometres? Will those carbon emissions be held for an unacceptably long period in the basin of the mountains? Has any of this been taken into consideration? The planned development at Ladies Mile is a vast, intensive development of high-rise buildings in a beautiful, delicate location. Slope Hill, an area designated as an outstanding natural landscape, sits behind, all part of a very beautiful and interesting landscape of flat land rising to undulating highs and low, which draws your eye and then pulls you high into the distance to the layers of the mountains beyond. To be drawn to a plethora of ugliness, which has no place in this location. My heart bleeds for this as it does for so many. It is an incredibly beautiful piece of highly productive rural land with Slope Hill framing it. This corridor is the entrance and exit to Queenstown. The stage is set for arrivals and departures. The plea is to keep the length of the right-hand side of the land free from development and to allow the countryside to take centre stage. Look to our forebears. Take heed of what their legacies were for us. Dunedin has beautiful botanic gardens, an amazing town belt which sweeps across the city. Christchurch has Hagley Park, large botanic gardens. Ask yourself, what are your grandchildren and great-grandchildren going to say about you and the legacies and responsibilities that you have been charged with for this development? Our botanic gardens here are relatively small. Why not create a beautiful big park on this land with magnificent trees and the heritage plantings that are already there for room for families to roam and enjoy? Many of the large housing developments are located out in the Frankton areas. Why not create something of lasting value and beauty for everyone to enjoy? I'm not alone. I'm begging you to leave this beautiful land as was designated by those who have gone before us.
Thank you, Ms. Crick. And if we could please, if you haven't already, just get a copy of the document you were reading from.
Oh, okay.
If you could give it to Shelley, the hearings administrator, or email it to her, whichever's easiest.
Okay.
And then we've just got a copy of everything you said.
Okay.
Because we could not keep up with
No.
with the writing.
With my pleas.
So, though I recorded down the key points, just in terms of just before you go, I will just quickly check if there's any questions from the panel.
No, no questions.
No, thanks very much.
What are your backgrounds?
Oh,
Are you all urban dwellers or country dwellers? Or?
All of our details are on the website,
Yeah.
but we're typically, well, a mixture, actually, of both. So we've got a mixture of urban and rural. So a combo.
A combo.
Which is good. From one thing to note where you were talking about apartment sales earlier on, we've heard evidence about apartments.
That's good.
And that, ironically, part of the issue is that given this is Queenstown, the areas of such low amenity that actually people in apartments would way prefer to be more centralised and have what we've been told is a much more spectacular view within towns. So it's interesting how the two go together. But
Well,
if there's apartments, it's more, because we're told it's more likely short to medium term to be medium density.
You were saying that's more likely out there. I mean, I'm criticising the first units of the build out at the school ground. As I say, they rise up out of the footpath, and it's like, how can anyone see that as being, I mean, good design, but how good is, what quality of life is that? I mean, they're right on the road, and it's like, but that whole rest of that land, I assume, is going to be built on. Well, what's stopping it now? What's happened? Who is the developer? I mean, why is that stopped? You're looking at these other places, you're looking at Ladies Mile, but there are other developments that are ongoing, and I know from planners that they have been trying to get consent for other developments. Well, they're just getting faced by a brick wall, and that's what I'm saying. It just seems that the council's been fixated on Ladies Mile rather than looking at other areas, which will be more healthy developments, and the one in Gorge Road seems more applicable because people can walk to work.
Well, thank you.
And more appropriate.
Thank you very much for your submission and for the different comments you made through it. And we'll take and have in front of us when we're discussing matters your hard copy or a version of that. So thank you very much. Now that brings us to the end of the day, so we'll adjourn until 9:30 tomorrow morning. Just quickly check whether there's anything from the council's perspective that you'd like to raise or discuss. We've been through a lot.
No, I mean, the only thing I'd signal is we're obviously taking on board the comments about the further conferencing or whatever form that might take. So
we're mindful. Well, number one, it's not so much our problem that it becomes our problem.
Yeah.
Number two, as has been alluded to today and to the submitters, it's potentially not so much the council's problem per se. It's for the submitters to be very clear with what they're wanting in their submission. And for a number of the submitters that we've been through, we've given homework on the basis that it's not for the council to try and guess what they want as well.
We, like you, need to see that, and then I think next week is the time when, to the extent it might be appropriate, we'll consider that further. But we do want to try and make your job as easy as possible.
That's much appreciated. Thank you.
There's a huge amount of material for you.
Thank you. Well, have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you for coming in today again, and we'll resume at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you very much.